Fans of the classics have been spoiled for the last few years. The Hades games I looked at previously pay homage to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey with brilliantly reimagined characters from antiquity. We have Epic the Musical retelling the story of the Odyssey with a production of the Iliad in the works. And as I found out after starting this video, Jerry Bruckheimer is producing an animated version of Epic. That's interesting. And Christopher Nolan's Odyssey is coming out soon. The anticipation has had me rereading the Odyssey and wondering what angle Nolan's going to take. But in this reread, I was most struck by how Jorge Rivera Evans reworked the epic poem into his musical. He made a lot of interesting choices, ones I've been picking apart and thinking about while wondering how they'll compare with the modifications Nolan will make. The story of the Odyssey has been told and retold so many times in the more than 2.5 millennia of its existence, and one of my favorite things to study is how stories change over time with multiple retellings. My objective in this video is to look at how Homer's roughly 8th century BCE epic poem compares with the musical primarily. I'll be doing this by rearranging the songs in Epic into the order of the events in the book, highlighting alterations and finally reflecting on differences between the two narratives. And then at the end, I'll share some thoughts on how Christopher Nolan might adapt these ideas into his film. Alright, let's see how the 40 songs in the musical Epic compare with the 24 books of Homer's Odyssey. If we were to rearrange Epic the Musical into the sequence followed by the book, we'd actually start with the song Love in Paradise. Book 1 begins with an invocation of a muse and some foreboding words of the torments ahead, and then the story is turned over to Athena, daughter of Zeus. Most of the warriors who fought in Troy were back home, but Odysseus, who longed to get back to his wife and reach his home, was being held in a hollow cave by that mighty nymph Calypso, noble goddess, who desired to have Odysseus as her husband. The gods pity Odysseus, all of them except Poseidon, but he was away in Ethiopia at the moment, picking up an offering of bulls and rams. Zeus, meanwhile, sighs, looking at what's happened to the heroes of the Trojan War. He shakes his head at the tragedy of Orestes, which I'm sure you all remember, so I don't need to go into it, but in case you need a reminder, Orestes is the son of Clytemnestra, of course, who I'm sure you all know. But in case you're forgetting her too, she is the wife of Agamemnon, who obviously is the brother of Menelaus, who of course is the husband of Helen, and it was Helen who was taken into Troy as the lover of Priam, kicking off the events of the Iliad, which is why Odysseus was fighting in Troy in the first place. He had to help Menelaus retrieve Helen so they could all go home where Clytemnestra would kill Agamemnon, maybe because her new lover Aegisthus wanted her to, maybe because Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia before departing for Troy, but whatever the reason, Orestes and his sister Electra had to avenge their father and kill Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, and that's why Zeus was shaking his head, particularly for poor Aegisthus. Should have heeded the warning Zeus and Hermes sent him, but Athena disagrees with Zeus, saying Aegisthus got what he deserved. And if all this feels tangential, just know that this is actually a crucial post-Troy story that affects the characters in the Odyssey profoundly and establishes several questions which will pervade the narrative. How will the returning warriors be received? Will everyone get what they deserve? What roles will the gods play in the bloody, tragic affairs of men? Athena turns her attention away from Aegisthus and to a man more deserving of the gods' lament. But my heart is torn for versatile Odysseus, ill-fated man who has had to suffer such misfortune for so many years far away from friends. He's on an island surrounded by the sea, the one that forms the ocean's navel stone, and there in the forests lives a goddess. Her soft, seductive speech keeps tempting him, urging him to forget his native land. Our second song from Epic then would be God Games, as Athena asks Zeus to consider the plight of the trapped Odysseus. While in the musical Zeus is wrathful, in the poem he remembers Odysseus fondly for the mortal's intellect and quality offerings. Only Poseidon opposes Odysseus, and Zeus thinks they can smuggle Odysseus back to Ithaca without upsetting the sea god too much. Athena asks him to send Hermes to Calypso to free Odysseus from her clutches. Meanwhile, she'll go to Ithaca to embolden the son of Odysseus, the burgeoning warrior Telemachus. She knows he's struggling with a group of suitors who keep butchering his flocks. She wants to send the boy on a voyage to learn the whereabouts of his disappeared father and to start building his own name, to make a hero out of him. I found myself wondering in the musical why Telemachus had departed. The reason is quite clear in the poem. He needs to learn about his father and to build his own character, the very things he yearns for in the song Legendary. Athena travels to Ithaca in the form of a foreigner named Mentes. She'll undergo several disguises throughout the story, and in Ithaca she observes the suitors playing games and eating and drinking from what belongs to Odysseus. Telemachus is sitting with them, daydreaming of his father and the sweet revenge Odysseus will exact on these suitors, when he notices the disguised Athena and rushes to her, eager to be a good host. Unfortunately, the rude suitors spoil his good hospitality with their indulgence and demand for entertainment, but Telemachus pulls the conversation away, talks about his father, and asks the guest questions about his home and story. As they do in the song We'll Be Fine, Telemachus and Athena establish a friendship, as Athena assures him Odysseus couldn't have been killed, and that the prophets and omens indicate he will return soon. Odysseus will not stay away much longer from his dear native land, not even if he's chained in iron fetters. He'll devise some way to get back home, for he's a man of infinite resources. But come now, tell me this, and speak straight and to the point. Are you in truth Odysseus' son? You're tall, and your head and handsome eyes look just like his, astonishingly so. I love the way she talks to him, trying to be comforting, optimistic, a sense the musical captured well in their friendship. Telemachus, in reply, opens up, saying he wished his father had died in some glorious way, as now he'd at least be remembered for his heroism. As things stand, Telemachus feels abandoned, the wondering eating away at him, while nobles from all around are trying to woo his mother and ravage his household. Athena uses this to urge Telemachus on a voyage to Pylos to find Nestor, who fought alongside Odysseus, and then on to Sparta to talk to Menelaus. After this, Athena gives him some dark instruction. When you've done that and brought these matters to a close, then think deep in your mind and heart how you might kill these suitors in your home, either openly or by some trick. You must not keep on acting like a child, you're too old for that. Have you not heard how excellent Orestes won fame among all men when he cut down his father's murderer, sly Aegisthus, because he had killed his famous father? Whether Telemachus learns that Odysseus lives or dies, the boy will return a man, and a warrior capable of avenging his father's death. Orestes is to be the model son to Telemachus. Athena fills his mind with a clearer memory of his father, blesses Penelope with sweet sleep to ease her distress, and departs. Telemachus, it is revealed, had recognized Athena, but he keeps the goddess's secrets. In a speech, he addresses the suitors, telling them to move their feasts to another house, or he would call on Zeus for retribution. Antinous and Eurymachus, two of the suitors, respond with taunts reminiscent of the song Little Wolf, calling him poorly taught by the gods, and resume their dancing and singing. Book 2 begins with a lengthy assembly in which Telemachus calls all of the Achaeans, or the Greeks, with what feels like a continuation of Little Wolf fused with Antinous' complaints of what Penelope does in the song called The Challenge. Telemachus, you boaster, your spirit is too unrestrained. How you carry on trying to shame us, since you so desire the blame should rest on us. But in your case, Achaean suitors aren't the guilty ones. Your own dear mother is, who understands how to use deceit. It's been 3 years now, and soon it will be 4 since she began to deceive the hearts in our Achaean chests. She gives hope to each of us, makes promises to everyone, and sends out messages, but her intent is different. In her mind, she has thought up another stratagem. She had a large loom set up in her rooms and started weaving something very big, with thread that was quite thin. She said to us, "Young men, those of you who are my suitors, since Odysseus is dead, you must wait, although you are all keen for me to marry, till I complete this cloak." The back and forth between the suitors and Telemachus continues as in Book 1, with the only noteworthy development being a pair of eagles that swoops down on the crowd, quote, "destruction in their eyes," until the eagles turn on each other and break off their attack to fly away. It's a message from Zeus, a portent of Odysseus' imminent return, as a soothsayer named Halitherses says. The suitors aren't threatened, though. They leave Telemachus with the threat of their own. His mother better remarry soon, because they aren't leaving until she does. Telemachus prays to Athena, who responds with 2 more disguises. First, resuming the We'll Be Fine song's development of Athena and Telemachus as friends, she counsels him in the guise of a companion of Odysseus named Mentor, steward of the house. Telemachus tells Penelope's wise handmaid Eurycleia that he's departing with the aid of a god, while Athena made herself appear as Telemachus himself to roam the city and gather for him a crew of sailors and a swift ship. She put a spell of drowsiness on the suitors, resumed her disguise as mentor, and led Telemachus to the beginning of his own voyage. Books 3 and 4 don't really feature in the musical, which is probably a good decision for a story that wants to center on Odysseus. These contain the voyage of Telemachus, wherein he and Athena, still guiding and comforting him while disguised as mentor, approach King Nestor of Pylos. Nestor knows nothing about Odysseus, but he does tell Telemachus about Agamemnon, who returned from Troy only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her new lover Aegisthus. The son of Clytemnestra and Agamemnon, Orestes, is again framed as a shining example for the young Telemachus. That's why it's good for any murdered man to leave a worthy son, for Orestes got his revenge against his father's killer, sly Aegisthus, who'd slain Agamemnon, that splendid man. And you, my friend, I see that you're a powerful, fine-looking man, but you must act with courage, so those born in future years will say good things of you. That's 3 times now that this other tragedy has been referenced, once by Zeus, once by Athena, and now again by Nestor. Clearly, this was a scarring moment for the characters. There is one scene in the book which somewhat relates to the song We'll Be Fine. While Nestor speaks with Telemachus, he hints at the great friendship Athena once had with Odysseus, something we don't really see in the epic poem to the extent we do in the musical. But it was a friendship that supposedly pervaded Odysseus's experiences at Troy. How I wish Athena with her bright eyes were willing to cherish you the way she cared back then for fine Odysseus in the land of Troy, where we Achaeans had to undergo such grievous times. For I have never seen the gods display their love so openly as Pallas Athena did, supporting him. If she was keen to love you in that way and to take you to her heart, those suitors would soon forget about being married. Shortly afterward, Athena reveals herself, transforming from her disguise as an old man into an eagle, winning the awe of the Achaeans and Nestor himself. Telemachus is blessed by the gods, just as his father. After a night's rest, Nestor presents Telemachus with gifts and libations, and Telemachus resumes his journey to Sparta. The meeting in Book 4 in many ways parallels that of Book 3. Telemachus and Athena meet with the leaders, this time Menelaus and Helen of Sparta, and they all cry as they reunite and reminisce about Odysseus. The stories they tell focus on the cunning of Odysseus in Troy. Helen tells about a time before the war when he donned a disguise to infiltrate the city walls. With savage blows, he battered his own body, threw a ragged garment on his shoulders so he looked like a slave, and then snuck in along the broad streets of that hostile town. No Trojan there suspected him. I was the only one who recognized him in spite of his disguise. Then his long sword slaughtered many Trojans, and he returned, bringing the Achaeans a full report on Troy. Trojan women began to cry aloud, but I was glad. My heart then had changed. It now desired to go back. I was sorry for that blindness Aphrodite brought, when she led me there, far from my own land, abandoning my child, my bridal room, and my own husband too, who lacked nothing in good looks or wisdom. A suspicious thing to say, after the war, with that very husband right there next to you. The different portrayals of Helen in antiquity are fascinating, how they blamed her and portrayed her after the war, sometimes as cunning, sometimes as being taken, and sometimes as colluding with Priam and going of her own accord. It's fascinating and deserves a video in its own right, maybe someday. For now, Menelaus proceeds, hinting at the famous incident with the Trojan horse, an account covered in the song The Horse and the Boy. I've roamed many lands, but these eyes of mine have never seen a man to match Odysseus. How I loved his steadfast heart. What about the things that forceful man endured and did in the wooden horse? Achaea's finest men, all of us, were crouching in it, carrying a lethal fate to Trojans. Then there's this humorous account in which Helen comes out, inspects the horse, and talks up the Greeks with a voice that reminds each man hidden in the horse of his wife back home. They really struggle to keep quiet, and Odysseus even has to clasp his hand over the mouth of one that tries to call out for Helen. Menelaus then gives a lengthy account about his own travels in Egypt. The only essential moment was a report from the prophet Proteus, the old man of the sea, who reveals that Odysseus is still alive and imprisoned by Calypso, bringing us back to the song Love in Paradise. I saw him on an island. He was weeping in the palace of the nymph Calypso, who keeps him there by force. He has no way of getting back to his own land. He lacks companions. He has no ships equipped with oars to carry him across the sea's broad back. And back in Ithaca, another diviner named Medon overhears a conspiracy by Antinous and Eurymachus to send an ambush against Telemachus. Penelope panics upon hearing this report, but Athena calms her by sending a phantom form of Penelope's sister, Iphthyme, to reassure Penelope. Having covered the voyages of Telemachus, we finally return in Book 5 to the story of the eponymous hero. The gods, reminded by Athena of Odysseus' troubles, agree that Calypso must let him go. The final events woven into the songs Love in Paradise and God Games, transitioning to the song Not Sorry for Loving You. Odysseus is sitting at the shore, weeping, while Calypso receives Hermes into her paradise. Hermes delivers the hard news that Zeus has ordered Odysseus be allowed to depart as soon as possible, for the fates have ordained his return home. I find Calypso's reaction fascinating, trembling with, quote, winged words, a description I thought was really cool, until I realized it's used like 1,000 times in the poem. She replies, "The gods are cruel and far too jealous, more so than others. They are unhappy if goddesses make mortal men their partners, taking them to bed for sex." She then lists examples, Dawn with Orion, Demeter with Iasion, both cases ending with the gods murdering the lover out of jealousy. She then continues, "Now once again you gods are envious, because a mortal man lives here with me. I saved him when he was all by himself. Wind and waves brought him here. This is a man I cherished and looked after, and I said I would make him ageless and immortal for all days to come." So when Zeus wants to sleep around and take a mortal companion, there's no problem. But whenever a goddess does the same thing, Olympus can't tolerate that. Indeed, Hermes replies with a threatening reminder of the stakes. "Yes, send him away. Think of Zeus's rage. He may get angry and make things hard for you in days to come." Quite a bit fiercer than the rendition of Calypso that we get in the musical, but I like both versions. The musical portrays a lonely goddess who thought this man was a godsend, a companion to keep her company. And you can see her deluding herself, thinking that the fact that he has a wife might just be a little glitch, a quirk of the fates. If she can just make his life good enough, if she can love him well enough, he'll be hers, he'll be happy. The poem's Calypso is less empathetic in that regard. By modern standards, her forcing Odysseus to sleep with her every night is not okay. But she has a good point when she casts her acts as more benevolent versions of the care the likes of Zeus give to their mortal companions. At least her human lover is cared for. And it is a double standard that Zeus can claim whomever he wants, but the goddess cannot. We do get to see how much Calypso cares for Odysseus, though, in their departure. "Poor man, spend no more time grieving on this island, wasting your life away. My heart agrees. The time has come for me to send you off. So come now, cut long timbers with an axe and make a raft, a large one. Build a deck high up on it, so it can carry you across the misty sea. I'll provision it with all the food and water and red wine you're going to need to satisfy your wants. I'll give you clothes and send you a favoring wind blowing you from your stern, so you may reach your own native land unharmed. If the gods are willing, the ones who hold wide heaven, whose will and force are mightier than mine." Odysseus is skeptical at this, but Calypso swears an oath not to impede his return, and even prepares a final feast. As they dine, she tries one more time to persuade him to stay, warning him of dangers ahead and reminding him that mortals cannot compete with the beauty of gods. Odysseus' reply is diplomatic and heartfelt, reminiscent of the song Dangerous, though in the musical he is expressing his determination to get home to Hermes instead of here to Calypso. "Mighty goddess, do not be angry with me over this. I myself know very well Penelope, although intelligent, is not your match to look at, not in stature or in beauty. But she's a human being, and you're a god. You'll never die or age. But still I wish every moment to get back to my home, to see the day of my return. And so, even if out there on the wine-dark sea some god breaks me apart, I will go on. The heart here in my chest is quite prepared to bear affliction. I've already had so many troubles, and I've worked so hard through waves and warfare. Let what's yet to come be added in with those." That sounds nice, but then they retire to an inner chamber and make love one last time before Odysseus departs, casting serious doubt on that line from god games. Not once has he cheated on his wife. True to her word, in the morning, Calypso does not impede his departure. In fact, she helps him build a raft and stocks it with provisions for his return journey. But 18 days into his sailing, Poseidon the Earthshaker returns from Ethiopia, leading us to the song Get in the Water. The mere sight of Odysseus, freed from his sorrows with Calypso, enrages him, and he determines to torment Odysseus even if the fates ordained his eventual safe return. He whips up a storm, and Odysseus breaks down, wishing he'd listened to Calypso, or died with his companions in Troy. Clinging to his shattered raft, he holds on until a goddess named Ino takes pity on him. She tells him to throw off the heavy clothes Calypso had given him and give himself to the seas and the winds, paddling toward a nearby island called Scheria, land of the Phaeacians. She gives him a veil and vanishes in the sea, quite a different escape than the one we see in the song 600 Strike, though, coincidentally, there are exactly 600 lines in this section of the poem. Athena blocks off all winds except for the one that guides Odysseus safely to shore, and Poseidon curses as he relents, satisfied with the knowledge that greater troubles still await in Odysseus's future. The events at Scheria are entirely cut from the musical, which I think was a good choice, but I'll still review them here. In Book 6, Athena is up to her usual meddling, navigating the city to find Nausicaa, daughter of the ruler Alcinous. Disguised as the young girl's friend, Athena appears to Nausicaa in a dream, talks to her about marriage, and tells her to get mules and a wagon from her father in the morning so she can clean clothes for the future festive day. Conveniently, which is to say by Athena's design, the girl goes to wash at the very stream where a sleeping Odysseus had washed up. Hoping to win her favor, cunning Odysseus calls to her with soothing language. "O divine queen, I come here as a suppliant to you. Are you a goddess or a mortal being? If you're one of the gods who hold wide heaven..." Hey, that phrase was used by Calypso. Interesting. "I think you most resemble Artemis, daughter of great Zeus, in your loveliness, your stature, and your shape. If you're human, one of those mortals living on earth, your father and your mother are thrice blessed, and thrice blessed your brothers too. In their hearts they must glow with pleasure for you always, when they see a child like you moving up into the dance. But the happiest heart, more so than all the rest, belongs to him who, with his wedding gifts, will lead you home. These eyes of mine have never gazed upon anyone like you, either man or woman. As I look at you, I am gripped with wonder." That sly dog, and this from someone who just recently slept with Calypso. Little liar. He then compares Nausicaa to a tree. Not quite as flattering if you ask me, but the words have their desired effect. Athena, the ultimate wingman, uses her influence to embolden Nausicaa and make Odysseus appear quite appealing, standing there naked on the shore with only a leafy branch to keep himself covered. Then Athena, Zeus's daughter, made him appear taller and more powerful. On his head she curled his hair. It flowed up like a flowering hyacinth. Then Odysseus went to sit down some distance off beside the seashore, glowing with charm and beauty. Nausicaa gazed at him in admiration. The girl then leads Odysseus to her father's house, and Odysseus gives Athena a prayer of thanks. Book 7 is, again, appropriately removed from the events of the musical. Odysseus arrives at the palace aided by a disguised Athena, who keeps him veiled in mist to avoid harassment until he can meet King Alcinous and Queen Arete. Eager to be good hosts, the rulers receive Odysseus, bring him to the hearth, and give him a feast. This has happened several times so far in the poem, hosts treating travelers to a feast, Nestor and Menelaus to Telemachus, even Calypso to Hermes. Travelers endure perils, and in addition to bringing news from far-off lands, they may be gods in disguise, bringing gifts or curses based on how well they are received. It's a rule of the ancient world: treat foreigners, travelers, and beggars well, for the sake of humanity, if not for your own possible future recompense. When the king and queen ask who he is, Odysseus gives an ironic reply. "O queen, it would be hard to tell the story of my miseries from start to finish. Heavenly gods have given me so many." And then in the coming books, he'll proceed to tell the story of his miseries from start to finish. He begins here with the captivity under Calypso, Poseidon's torment, and his rescue at the hands of their daughter. Note the clever way Odysseus rephrases that encounter, this time appeasing the parents instead of the soon-to-be married girl herself. "I pleaded with her, and she revealed no lack of noble sense, the sort you would not hope to come across at a first encounter with one so young, for youthful people act so thoughtlessly. A nice tactical phrasing there, and it seems to work since not long later the king says, "By Father Zeus, Athena, and Apollo, I wish, given the kind of man you are, one who in his mind thinks just as I do, you'd marry my child and become my son, and then remain here. I'd give you a home and wealth as well if you would choose to stay." Every father wants a son-in-law who thinks just like him. It's quite the offer, but Odysseus longs to get home, and in the end, they agreed to aid him in his return after a night's rest. You can think of Book 8 as 4 trials or incidents, revealing to King Alcinous that this smooth-talking stranger is far more than he appears to be. Before Odysseus departs, the king holds an assembly and a banquet. The first trial/incident occurs when a bard named Demodocus sings about a quarrel of Odysseus and Achilles at Troy. Odysseus begins to cry. The men of the Odyssey are really in touch with their feelings. They weep all over the place. They are always embracing each other and kissing and hugging, and just the waterworks. Odysseus here isn't just crying, he is falling apart. Odysseus's strong hands clutched his long purple cloak, pulled it above his head, and hid his handsome face. He felt ashamed to let the Phaeacians look at him with tears streaming from his eyes, so every time the godlike minstrel paused in his song, Odysseus would wipe away the tears, take his two-handled cup, and pour out a libation to the gods. But then when Demodocus started up again, urged to sing by Phaeacian noblemen enjoying his song, Odysseus would cover up his head once more and groan. He concealed the tears he shed from all those present except Alcinous, the only one who noticed since he sat beside him and heard his heavy sighs. The king tries to cover for Odysseus by suggesting they move on to some games to test themselves, refresh their spirits, and, most importantly, so Odysseus will spread the word about how talented the Phaeacians are. Again, treat your guests well. The poem literally takes 10 lines to list the names of the competitors, talking them up like it's some advertisement for the Hunger Games. In this, the second incident, one of the contestants, Euryalus, a match for man-destroying Ares, taunts Odysseus, who has been avoiding others' pressure to join the contest, like someone refusing to sing at a karaoke. But when Euryalus says Odysseus is, quote, not a real man, that's literally what the translation says, Odysseus comes up with this witty reply. "Stranger, what you've just said is not so wise, like a man whose foolishness is blinding him. How true it is that the gods do not present their lovely gifts to all men equally, not beauty, shape, or skill in speaking out. One man's appearance may not be attractive, but a god will crown his words with beauty. And yet another man can be so beautiful, he looks like an immortal, but his words are empty of all grace. That's how you are. Your appearance is extremely handsome, a god could hardly make any finer, but your mind is empty." That's good. Still irked, Odysseus stands, picks up a discus, one bigger and much heavier than the ones used by the Phaeacians, and he sends it sailing far beyond those thrown by the contestants. It happens to land, in fact, right by Athena, disguised as a man who notes where it falls and shouts praises back to him. The king both praises Odysseus and quickly moves to remind him of all the ways Phaeacians excel, their running, sailing, feasts, lyres, dancing, and finery. To show that, he returns to the performance, which leads to the third incident. Demodocus the bard sings the song of the gods when the god of the forge Hephaestus caught his wife Aphrodite, the goddess of love, in an affair with Ares, the god of war. I love this line from the story, quote, "Ares spoke to Aphrodite, having sex with him seemed quite delightful. All he did was speak. But the lovers are ensnared in a netted trap Hephaestus had set for them. The poor guy calls all the gods together and says, 'Aphrodite, Zeus's daughter, scorns me and lusts after Ares the destroyer because he's beautiful with healthy limbs while I was born deformed. I'm not to blame, my parents are. I wish they'd never had me.'" Jeez, man. Hephaestus basically holds them hostage, refusing to release them until Zeus returns all the courting gifts he gave for that, quote, shameless goddess. A lovely daughter, but a sex-crazed wife. I mean, you did marry the goddess of love. Also, I think we need to ignore that all of these people are siblings. Well, Aphrodite might share the same father, so half-siblings with the brothers Ares and Hephaestus, who are both born of Hera, Zeus's wife and sister. Yeah, we're gonna ignore all of that. But the plan of Hephaestus really didn't work. The gods were basically just jealous that Ares got to be pinned under a net with Aphrodite. All the gods, that is, except Poseidon, who agreed and paid Hephaestus what was owed to release them. It's a bit of a strange, sad, but also hilarious story that interestingly seems to parallel Odysseus twice. We know that he, like Ares, was kinda sleeping around with Calypso, consensually at the end, and he was quick to woo Nausicaa, and we'll see maybe some other extramarital ventures soon. He can hardly be called faithful in a modern sense, but also, like Hephaestus, he is about to exact revenge on who would dare pursue his wife. Possessor and possessive, Odysseus was truly a godlike man. Everything seems to be going well. Odysseus loves the story of the gods. He receives a gift from Arete and an endearing goodbye from Nausicaa. Farewell, stranger. Once you have returned to your own country, I hope you will remember me sometimes. And Odysseus' reply is also sweet. There I will pray to you all my days as to a god. For you, girl, you gave me my life. That's nice. But then Odysseus gets a bit arrogant. He asks Demodocus to sing about the famous Odysseus of Troy. And in this fourth and final incident, Demodocus obeys. He sings about how the Greeks were ready to retreat when the glorious warrior Odysseus contrived a plan. Yes, we have finally arrived at the beginning of the story. And it is here where we would actually probably place the song, The Horse and the Infant, though it's told through flashbacks. Also, it's worth noting, nowhere in the Iliad or the Odyssey is there this story of the Trojan horse. It is just mentioned a few times in the Odyssey, but we don't get the full account. That full account would have been contained in a lost poem of the epic cycle, a collection of 8 poems about the Trojan War, the Iliad and the Odyssey being the only 2 which survive. The Little Iliad and the Iliupersis would have contained the events with the Trojan horse. Most modern ideas of what happened here stem from the version in the Latin poem, the Aeneid, written centuries after the Odyssey was compiled, and the Aeneid is written from the Trojan/Roman perspective. These lost events are also why everyone has stories of Odysseus and Agamemnon from Troy. They're wondering what happened to Odysseus. The others already came home. Stories have been spreading. The question remained, whatever happened to Odysseus? The matter in these songs, The Horse and the Infant and Just a Man, of the fate of Hector's child, named Astyanax by the way, is not addressed at all in the Odyssey, and Greeks disagree about what actually happened here. There are some versions of the story that have one Neoptolemus killing the child either by throwing him from the wall or by beating Priam to death using Astyanax as a club. There are other accounts though that say it was Odysseus, and there are even some later ones that say the child actually survived. So the content of these 2 songs pulls from traditions outside of the Odyssey. Back to the poem, while the bard sings, Odysseus yet again weeps, quote, just as a woman cries. And bit of an interesting line considering the insult Odysseus received earlier to his manliness, to say nothing of how often men weep in this story, but alright. King Alcinous witnesses this, and he pushes Odysseus, reveal who you are really. And finally, in Book 9, Odysseus reveals his true identity and tells his backstory. And this is where we start to piece together the events that led up to his captivity on Calypso's island. He begins by reminiscing a bit about Ithaca, continuing with this theme that's quite pervasive through the story, a term called nostos, longing for home. His words are interesting, recasting his affairs with Calypso and Circe, and this is the first time in the poem that we are hearing of one Circe. When Calypso, that lovely goddess, tried to keep me with her in her hollow cave, longing for me to become her husband, or when, in the same way, the cunning witch, Aiaian Circe, held me in her home, filled me with a keen desire that I'd marry her, they never won the heart here in my chest. That's how true it is. There's nothing sweeter than a man's own country and his parents, even if he's living in a wealthy house, but in a foreign land, away from those who gave him life. It's like he's trying to further build empathy with himself, along with intrigue, allusions to this ensnarement by a goddess and an affair with a cunning witch. But what stands out to me is that what Odysseus misses is not so much his wife as his homeland. Rather, like Helen, longed to return to Sparta, not necessarily to Menelaus. The musical definitely plays up the romance and updates the morals of the protagonists, as is starkly evident in the much darker tone of what happens next. In the song, Full Speed Ahead, the Greeks depart Troy and they aim for Ithaca, pausing to check out an island for food where, in the musical, Polites sings about the need to have a positive outlook in life. In the poem, however, Odysseus and his men first land in Ismarus, land of the Cicones, where they kill most of the men and enslave the women. There's no debate here about whether to be humane or monstrous. Honestly, I'd take the song Different Beast, in which Odysseus and his crew commit slaughter without regret, and I would move it here to their treatment of the Cicones. I destroyed the city there, killed the men, seized their wives and captured lots of treasure which we divided up. I took great pains to see that each man got an equal share. Then I gave orders that we should leave on foot and with all speed. But the men were foolish, they did not listen, they drank too much wine, and on the shoreline slaughtered many sheep, as well as shambling cows with twisted horns, killing the men and seizing wives, and yes, that means exactly what you think it means. So much for this line. Note how this is stated so plainly. It's not something he is ashamed of. It was what was expected at the time. Women and treasure are spoils of war. If Odysseus is trying to keep the empathy of his audience, this wouldn't have been a deal breaker. What he does emphasize is that he divided the spoils evenly, and he was the wise one who wanted to depart soon, but the men seem to have forgotten their voyage, content to indulge in gluttony instead. Another event that becomes a pattern and theme throughout this journey home, a journey wrought with distractions. In the end, Odysseus and his men only leave because reinforcements arrive, killing 6 of his men per ship. Odysseus was already struggling as a captain right from the onset of their journey home. It is now that we would get the song Storm, though instead of blowing them to the wind god's island in the sky, Zeus's 10-day tempest brings them far, far, far away to the land of the Lotus Eaters. Unlike in the song Open Arms, this land is separate from that of the Cyclopes, and Odysseus gets no friendly, optimistic advice. Instead, the intoxicating fruits make Odysseus's men forget about their voyage home. He has to drag them back to the ships and lock them up so they can finally depart. When they reach the land of the Cyclopes, the roles change. The sailors advised Odysseus to be quick about snatching the sheep and crates of milk and cheese from a cave, and then to book it out of there. But this time it's Odysseus who wants to linger. The way he describes the Cyclops is interesting. It's very othering. What makes the creatures barbaric tells us actually a lot more about the narrators. We sailed away from there with heavy hearts and reached the country of the Cyclopes, a crude and lawless people. They don't grow any plants by hand or plow the earth, but put their trust in the immortal gods. God-trusting people. And though they never sow or work the land, still every kind of crop springs up for them. Wheat and barley and rich grape-bearing vines, and Zeus provides the rain to make them grow. They live without a council or assembly or any rule of law in hollow caves among the mountaintops. Each one of them sets down laws for his own wives and children, and they shun all dealings with each other. He says this to make them sound uncivilized, monstrous, but when he ventures out, he finds a cave overhung with laurel, a stone courtyard, and a giant who tends to his flocks alone. One specifically described as living alone, away from others. And it's that isolated herdsman that Odysseus targets. When, as in the song Polyphemus, the eponymous Cyclops returns, Odysseus hopes for a sign of hospitality, despite being caught uninvited in the stranger's house eating his cheese. As for us, we're visitors here and come as suppliants to your knee, in the hope that you will welcome us or give some gift, the usual things one does for strangers. And so, good sir, respect the gods. We are here as suppliants to you, and Zeus protects all suppliants and strangers. As god of guests, he cares for all respected visitors. As the Cyclops aided Zeus in his fight against Cronus, they had the god's favor. Perhaps Odysseus appealed to the name as a way to win over his host. But Polyphemus says the Cyclops are more powerful than the gods, and he clearly does not trust the intruders. He leaps up and eats 2 of Odysseus's men, imprisoning the others. We don't get any of the fighting back that happens in the song Survive. Understandably, Odysseus wants to kill the Cyclops, but only Polyphemus can move the massive rock blocking the door. The Greeks wait out the night while the Cyclops sleeps, and in the morning the monster proceeds like it's a normal day. As soon as rose-fingered early dawn appeared, he made a fire and milked his flock one by one, with a newborn placed beside each mother. When this work was over, he once again snatched 2 of my men and gorged himself. After his meal, he easily rolled back the huge rock door, drove his rich flock outside, and set the stone in place as one might put a cap back on a quiver. The Cyclops, whistling loudly, drove his fat flocks away towards the mountain. Not gonna lie, I kinda find myself rooting for Polyphemus here. He's got style. Inside the cave, though, Odysseus starts scheming, hoping Athena would grant him vengeance. He creates a spear out of the Cyclops' club, and assembles a team of 5 men, including himself, to stab the Cyclops in the eye when Odysseus gives the command. That night, Polyphemus returns, guiding each of his animals into the spacious cave, and counts them one by one, placing the young by their mothers as begins, he eats 2 more men. Seems they've been adopted into his food storage. Odysseus then makes his move. He offers the Cyclops a bowl of dark red wine, claiming it was a gift he hoped would win the host's pity. The Cyclops loves the wine and asks for the man's name, leading to this famous exchange. "I'll tell you, then you can offer me a gift as your guest here. My name is Nobody. My father and mother, all my friends, they call me Nobody." "That's what I said." His ruthless heart replied, "Well, Nobody, I'll eat all your companions before you, and have you at the end. My gift to you, since you're my guest." But before he can make good on his threat, Polyphemus passes out, and this is where the song Remember Them begins. Odysseus heats the spear until it's glowing hot, and his team stabs Polyphemus in the eye. His howling wakes the neighbors, but when they come running to check on him, Polyphemus says, "Nobody is killing me, my friends, by treachery, not using any force." They answered him, their words had wings. Told you they use that a lot. "Well then, if nobody is hurting you and you're alone, it must be sickness given by great Zeus, one you can't escape, so say your prayers to our father, Lord Poseidon." Odysseus and his men escape by tying themselves to the underbellies of the large sheep as they trot out to pasture. Odysseus is holding onto the last one to leave, which the Cyclops pauses to speak to while petting its back. "My lovely ram, how come you are the last one in the flock to move out of the cave? Not once before have you ever lagged behind the others. No, you have always been well out in front, striding off to graze on fresh shoots of grass and be the first to reach the river's stream. And you're the one who longs to get back home once evening comes before the others do. But now you're last of all. You must be sad." I used to find it amusing, if not a tad ridiculous, that in the musical Polyphemus has a favorite sheep. It was endearing, but it didn't really feel monstrous. I loved finding out that Polyphemus is actually portrayed as an empathetic character in the poem too. He is a monster, but a humanity shines through the barbarism Odysseus ascribes to him. In the end, the Cyclops looks big, dangerous, and dumb, too simple to match Odysseus's wits, but one still kinda just wants to give him a hug. He's been imagined and reimagined in many ways too, another character deserving of a video of his own. Again, maybe someday. Odysseus scowls at his men who lament the slain, instead telling them to steal as many sheep as they can and set sail. Bloated with hubris and the very foolishness for which he mocked the blinded Cyclops, he turns around to shout from the safety of the waters, a speech less inspiring than that in the musical. "Cyclops, it seems he was no weakling after all, the man whose comrades you wished to eat, using brute force in that hollow cave of yours. Your evil acts were bound to catch you out, you wretch. You didn't even hesitate to gorge yourself on guests in your own home. Now Zeus and other gods have paid you back." The Cyclops' great sin, then, was inhospitality, something which must have made the listening Phaeacians shake their head. Poor Polyphemus tries to throw rocks at Odysseus, but doing so only makes the water surge, carrying Odysseus' ship helpfully offshore. Odysseus, however, is too carried away by a, quote, warrior spirit, this description being the closest thing I could find to a song largely absent from the poem, My Goodbye, though it will come up again later. He refuses to listen to his men's objections and instead taunts Polyphemus even more. "Cyclops, if any mortal human being asks about the injury that blinded you, say your eye was burned out by Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, a man from Ithaca." A bold, stupid, and eventually fatal move. In the poem, Polyphemus even says he's the son of Poseidon, whom he could talk to about his stabbed eye, and Odysseus taunts on, saying he should send Polyphemus down to Hades, and not even Poseidon could cure his eye. Polyphemus then offers a prayer to his father, which proves quite prophetic. "Hear me, Poseidon, enfolder of the earth, dark-haired god. If I truly am your son, and if you are my father as you claim, grant that Odysseus, sacker of cities, a man from Ithaca, Laertes' son, never gets back home. If it's his destiny to see his friends and reach his native land and well-built house, may he arrive there late and in distress after all his comrades have been killed, and in someone else's ship, and may he find misfortune in his home." You can't really blame the Cyclops for making that prayer. In Book 10, Odysseus continues his narrative with his arrival at Aeolia, home of the wind god Aeolus, paralleling the second half of the song Storm, Luck Runs Out, and Keep Your Friends Close. In the poem, though, Aeolia is simply described as a floating island, one with an impenetrable wall of bronze and cliffs. It's unclear what exactly this means, but the idea of an island in the sky in the musical doesn't seem to be what the poem is describing. Odysseus just sails right up to it, and he is treated to a month of entertainment and celebration, and we're back to more glorious hosts. We're also going to ignore that Iolaus gives his 6 daughters to his 6 sons in marriage. That's another checkmark for what I'm going to call STIs, skipping the incest points. I'll be generous and just count the whole affair with Hephaestus and Aphrodite and Ares and all the Olympians as just 1 point, and Iolaus here brings us to 2. After hearing Odysseus' story, Iolaus gives Odysseus a bag with all the winds tied up in it, and within 10 days the crew is in sight of Ithaca, so close that they can see men tending to the beacon fires that guide ships to land. But as Odysseus sleeps, the shipmates mutter to each other, thinking Iolaus gave Odysseus some great treasure. They tear open the bag expecting to find gold and silver, but instead unleashing a storm. Their greed keeps them from home, and Odysseus responds by more moping about, literally. Covering up my head, I just lay there on the deck, while our ships, loaded with my whimpering companions, were driven by those wicked blasts of wind all the way back to Iolaus' island. Odysseus returns to ask the partying wind god's favor, but Iolaus' reply makes him, quote, sick at heart. Of all living mortals, you are the worst, so you must leave this island with all speed. It would violate all sense of what is right if I helped out or guided on his way a man the blessed gods must hate, so leave. You are here because the deathless gods despise you. Ouch. The comment must haunt Odysseus, for several times throughout the poem the question recurs, do the gods hate Odysseus? Will they save him in the end, or will they abandon him? Instead of being blown to the island of the giant Laestrygonians, as happens in the musical, the Achaeans rowed to the land of the giants, over a period of 7 exhausting, breezeless days. They land at Telepylus, and Odysseus sends scouts ahead to find out who these people are. The scouts are horrified to find an immense people, tall like a mountain peak, and in an assembly, the Laestrygonians decide to cook the scouts. See, these ones are civilized, they have assemblies. All the scouts but one escapes though, and the giants roar and pour out from the cliffs, while the scouts flee back to the ships. The frightening scene isn't shown in the musical. From the cliffs they hurled rocks down on us, the largest stones a man can lift. The clamor from the ships was dread, my men were being destroyed, ships were smashing into one another, those huge monsters spearing men like fish and taking them to eat a gruesome meal. While they were slaughtering the sailors there, trapped in the deep harbor, I grabbed my sword, pulled it from my thigh, and cut the cables on my dark proud ship, yelling to my crew, ordering them to put their oars to work so we could get away from this disaster. They all churned the water with their oar blades, afraid of being killed. We were relieved as my ship left the beating cliffs behind, moving out to sea, but the other ships, those in the harbor, were totally destroyed. Each of the Greek ships, except Odysseus's, sunk, an act instead performed by Poseidon in the song Ruthlessness. Odysseus and his Solan companions then traveled to Aiaia, home of the dread goddess Circe. At first, the crew spends a few days at the edge of the island, weeping, but surviving off the wildlife, a sign to Odysseus that maybe the gods don't all hate him. He uses a slain stag to assure his crew they aren't going to Hades just yet, an ironic statement as that's exactly where they're going to go after this island. Odysseus then sends one Eurylochus off with 22 companions to find the source of the smoke rising over the trees. This crew finds Circe's stone abode, surrounded by wolves and lions, and with views in all directions. But something's off. The animals walk on hind legs, and they beg for food like a dog. One Polites, described as the most trusted and cherished shipmate of Odysseus, spots a woman singing and weaving a tapestry, and he leads the team in, calling to her with all the warmth and friendly positivity he expresses in the song Open Arms. They heed her invitation to come inside, all except Eurylochus, who suspects a trick, and sure enough, she has mixed into the drinks and food a drug that would wipe the memories of home, and with her wand, she turns them into pigs. As in the song Puppeteer, Eurylochus flees back to report to Odysseus and the men who remained with him. Odysseus arms himself with a silver sword and bow and hunts for this Circe, despite the objections of Eurylochus to leave. On the way, Odysseus comes across a youthful god Hermes, who assures Odysseus that there's no saving his men unless he follows the god's instructions. The song, Wouldn't You Like, captures well Hermes' message. He describes her tactics, drugging, casting a spell with her elegant wand, and seduction, but he gives Odysseus an herb with black roots and white flowers called moly, which will make Odysseus immune to her magic, and tells him to sleep with Circe if she will promise not to use any spells on him. While the showdown in the song Done For doesn't include any manifesting of beasts, it does include Odysseus's immunity to her magic and drawing his sword as if he intends to kill Circe. She screams, clings to his knees, and marvels at Odysseus's resistance to her magic. She recalls a prophecy of Hermes that one Odysseus would arrive on his way back from Troy, and proposes that they make love as a sign that they can trust each other. As much as I love how Odysseus turns his rendezvous with Circe from a potential affair to a therapy session in the song There Are Other Ways, they do not, in fact, employ other ways of arriving at a truce in the poem. Odysseus lays down the terms, Circe swears her oath, and they make love. And so much yet again for that line. After this, Odysseus mopes around while Circe tries to give him a feast because Odysseus misses his men. Circe makes good on her promise, smears a potion on each pig, and the reunited men are, quote, overcome with passionate weeping. Again, so much weeping that it moves Circe to pity. She tries to spoil Odysseus and his men, letting them indulge in the luxury of her home, and Eurylochus is pissed about this. You wretched creatures, where are you going? Are you so in love with these disasters you're going back there to Circe's house, where she'll transform you all to pigs or wolves or lions, so we'll be forced to protect her great house for her? It's like what the Cyclops did when our companions went inside his cave with this reckless man Odysseus. Thanks to his foolhardiness, those men were killed. Odysseus almost draws his sword to strike him, like a much tenser version of luck runs out. But it was his foolishness and forgetting his voyage, wanting to indulge, that got his men killed, so one could hardly blame Eurylochus. In the end, the crew pacifies Odysseus, and Eurylochus agrees to follow them to Circe's. But the days turn to weeks, then months. They end up staying a whole year, and Odysseus's men have to persuade him to return to Ithaca. Finally, Odysseus throws his arms around Circe's legs, a nice parallel with her having done the same thing to him earlier, and weeping, he pleads for her permission to depart. She allows it, instructing him to go first to Hades, give libations, and consult the blind prophet Tiresias on how to safely navigate homeward. Which would make for a great dramatic end to the section, except that there is one more little weird aside. Before they depart, there's a strange scene cut from the musical for good reason, in which Odysseus gathers his men to tell them of the plan. During this, a youth named Elpenor, who had drunkenly fallen asleep on the roof the night before, falls without anyone noticing and breaks his neck, and just dies. Poor guy. So, Elpenor's spirit zooms ahead to Hades, and Odysseus's crew follows not too far behind. In Book 11, Odysseus narrates to the Phaeacians his katabasis, of course paralleling the song The Underworld. He follows Circe's instructions, sailing to the land of the Cimmerians, Oceanus, a region perpetually enshrouded in mist and cloud, removed from the sun god Helios. Note that the geography of this in particular is quite disputed. There, Odysseus does not so much go to the underworld as he brings it to him. Eurylochus helps Odysseus sacrifice a sheep, and with a complex ritual of pouring libations, sprinkling barley meal in a circle, and offering prayers and vows of future sacrifices, Odysseus draws to himself the souls of the dead. Then out of Erebus came swarming up shades of the dead, brides, young unmarried men, old ones worn out with toil, young tender girls with hearts still new to grief, and many men wounded by bronze spears who died in battle, still in their blood-stained armor. Crowds of them came thronging in from all sides of the pit with amazing cries. Pale fear seized my heart. That poor Elpenor, who just fell from the roof, is the first shade to appear, and he begs for a proper burial back in Aiaia. Odysseus' mother, Anticleia, then appears, but they don't speak quite yet. Something about the ritual blood requires Odysseus refrain from letting any shade too near until after he has spoken to Tiresias. Because of this, Odysseus' meeting with the blind prophet in the song No Longer You actually occurs toward the beginning of his katabasis. Tiresias appears with a golden staff and says, "Venturous Odysseus, Laertes' son and Zeus' child, what now, you unlucky man? Why leave the sunlight, come to this joyless place and see the dead? Move from the pit and pull away your sword so I may drink the blood and speak the truth." This ritual is so cool. Odysseus obeys, and after drinking, Tiresias reveals that it's Poseidon who is opposing the Achaean crew for them having blinded Polyphemus. He foretells Odysseus' fate. He will suffer, and even if he endures the suffering under Poseidon's rage, a threat awaits if his crew touches the cattle of Helios. Even so, he may escape the wrath of the gods, late, grieving in someone else's ships, and having lost all of his companions, but eventually he may return to Ithaca. It's just as Polyphemus the Cyclops predicted. And then, as Polyphemus the Cyclops had also prayed, he'll find more trouble, but he'll have his revenge on the violent men who are eating his food and courting his wife. Tiresias instructs him to kill the suitors, offer a rich sacrifice to appease Poseidon, and make offerings to all the immortal gods in order, and then he'll have a gentle death at sea in ripe old age, with his people prospering around him. This done, Odysseus immediately asks about his mother, and Tiresias tells him that any shade he lets approach the blood will recognize and be able to speak to him. And Diclea drinks, and seeing Odysseus, asks why he hasn't yet returned to Ithaca. She updates him on the conditions of his family and how she died of grief and waiting. "I was not struck and killed inside my home by gentle arrows of the keen-eyed archer, nor did I die of some disease which steals spirit from our limbs as we waste away in pain. No, it was my longing for you, glorious Odysseus, for your loving care that robbed me of my life, so honey sweet." She finished, "In my heart I thought about how much I yearned to hold my mother's shade. My spirit urged me to clasp her in my arms. 3 times I moved toward her, but each time she slipped away like a shadow or a dream." Odysseus then talks with a flurry of women shades, taking care to mention with which gods they had each had sex, and also Oedipus's mother, whose monstrous act we're going to just skip over. That is 3 for the STI meter. He goes on for a while, name-dropping famous women for well over 100 lines, and ends by telling the Phaeacians, "I cannot mention all the women I saw, but clearly it was not for lack of trying." At this point there's a funny interruption in which Odysseus asks his Phaeacian hosts if he can go to bed. He might be building their anticipation, as the spellbound audience would want to know just who Odysseus met from all the best stories, but it's also possible this simply breaks up the narrative and reminds the reader/listener that all of this is being told to an audience. Likewise, I could go on a tangent here and remind you that this poem, as is true of much of ancient poetry, was originally an oral tradition. By listening to renditions like Epic or this video, you're playing the part of the very kind of audience member who would have sat in antiquity consuming this narrative, which I don't know, I find it cool, especially in the musical format. Stories of the Odyssey were probably delivered in small episodes, in verse, dactylic hexameter to be particular. It's like listening to a song or two, highlights of your favorite stories from the tale of Odysseus. This might also account for why there are so many repetitive moments written in the text. Additionally, the poetry would have been much longer lasting, like lyrics that you remember to songs more than exact wording in conversations. Not set in stone, but with a certain meter and rhythm that would have made committing the poem to memory and reciting it with fair accuracy much easier. As I see it, the musical rendition of ancient poetry is actually an incredible continuation of an old tradition. Anyway, for whatever the reason, the Phaeacians don't appreciate this tangential distraction. Maybe you'll appreciate it more than the Phaeacians did. They want to know if he met any famous Greeks who fell at Troy in Hades, because everything in the epics is always about Troy. At their prompting, Odysseus resumes his story, telling them about Agamemnon, whose shade reveals the events of his murder. This is, the 4th time we've referenced the story of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra in this poem? Agamemnon and Odysseus commiserate about how awful the women in their lives are, Helen and Clytemnestra, and how Zeus would surely curse the family of Atreus due to women's conniving. Isn't it interesting how Odysseus is also described as conniving, and many die from his schemes, and there's serious questioning as to whether he might be hated by the gods, but we are supposed to like Odysseus, and we're supposed to curse Helen and Clytemnestra with the audience. Agamemnon leaves Odysseus with this haunting piece of advice. "But I'll tell you something else. Keep this firmly in your mind. Bring your ship back to your dear native land in secret, without public display, for there's no trust in women anymore." See, this, in my opinion, is why the death of Agamemnon and the revenge by Orestes against Clytemnestra are repeatedly mentioned in a story ostensibly about Odysseus, a story which begins by discussing Agamemnon and Telemachus. The question is never whether Odysseus will get home. It's clearly stated that the fates have dictated he would. In the musical, though, the question is whether Odysseus will be a man or a monster by the time he makes it home. Will he be the same man he was when he married his wife? In the poem, the question is flipped. When Odysseus makes it home, will Penelope be the same woman he left behind? Or will she, like Clytemnestra, betray him, leaving Telemachus to be the next Orestes? And if you look through Telemachus's interactions with Penelope, he treats his mother quite harshly, like they're building up to this being a real possibility. Revisiting another theme, Odysseus also meets Achilles, the fallen hero of the Iliad, who debates the merits of glory versus returning home. It was the death of Patroclus that convinced Achilles to seek, if not glory, revenge rather than a safe return. But the shade of Achilles expresses regret. A simple life as a shepherd is far superior to a glorious death, he says, a direct clash with what Telemachus had earlier said to Athena when he wished that Odysseus had fallen in battle to achieve glory rather than disappear into obscurity. Odysseus also sees fallen war heroes, as well as Ajax, though Ajax ignores Odysseus for reasons not explained in the Odyssey. Essentially, he had lost in a contest of who should inherit the armor of the fallen Achilles to Odysseus, who was blessed by Athena. Either in shame for this, or for mad fit in which he slaughtered the Greeks' cattle, Ajax plunged his sword into his own chest, and clearly the wounds of war and pride still haunt him in the underworld. Odysseus continues his underworld parade, seeing Heracles, Orion, the punishment of Sisyphus, and the starving Tantalus with food just out of reach. But 1,000 tribes of souls ask about their relatives, scaring Odysseus, and he fears what else Persephone might send him from the depths, such as the Gorgon's head or some other monster. So he departs, sailing away from Oceanus and back to Aiaia. While there's no introspection on past events or Odysseus' moral character as there is in the final song of Act 1, Monster, we are about the halfway point in both the musical and the poem despite the scrambling of events. But here in Book 12, Odysseus actually returns to Aiaia, buries Elpenor, and spends another night with Circe. It's Circe who warns Odysseus of the monsters ahead, promising they'll avoid suffering as long as they follow her counsel, though warning that ill-thought acts will lead to great pain. By her recommendation, the crew fills their ears with beer wax and binds Odysseus himself to the mast to avoid the siren's tempting song. Though, funnily enough, Circe had said that the men should only bind him if he was keen to hear the song. When Odysseus gives the instructions to his men, he says that Circe had instructed that he alone listen to the song. A bit of a discrepancy there, with Odysseus framing it to his men as an instruction rather than a mere fancy. He just really wanted to hear their new album. And when he does, he begs to be released, but the men only tighten the bonds until they're clear from the sound. As fun and brilliant as they are, the events in the song Suffering do not match the narrative in the poem at all. Though I love the idea of the seductive song being what Odysseus most wants, a reunion with his wife. In the poem, the sirens promise to tell the stories about the Trojan War. War, wife, hard to pick between the two, which is better. Just goes to show how much glory and reminiscing of great deeds mattered to the characters, to say nothing of Homer's audience. Interestingly, Circe explains that at this point there will be two paths for Odysseus to take. The first she recommends against, for no human has ever reached this place and made it past. Instead, waves from the sea and deadly blasts of fire carry away a whirling mass of timbers from the boat and human corpses. Only one ocean ship, most famous of them all, has made it through, the Argo, on her way from Aeetes. And waves would soon have smashed that vessel too against the massive rocks had Hera not propelled her through, for Jason was her friend. Why waves and fire are worse than Scylla and Charybdis, I don't know, but I love that we have here a connection to yet another tragedy, and one of my favorites from antiquity, that of Medea. The allusion fits nicely into the repeated mentions of Clytemnestra, as we have another violent wife who wrongs her cherished and totally innocent husband, Jason. As Agamemnon said, this is not a world where women are to be trusted. I do find it a bit odd, though, that Jason could sail through because he had the favor of Hera. I mean, Odysseus has the favor of Athena. Maybe he would have been safe taking this route, or maybe, as he's literally laying with Circe during this conversation, he would have had Hera's wrath, with her being the goddess of marriage. But we'll never know, as the fates had a different course in mind. Odysseus takes the latter route, Circe describes, straight between two terrors. On the one side, there's a mountain that rises to an eternal cloud, its cliffs so smooth no man could scale them. Halfway up, there's a shadowy cave facing west toward Erebus, and Circe recommends he sail there toward that cave. In there lives Scylla. She has a dreadful yelp, It's true her voice sounds like a newborn pup, but she's a vicious beast. No mortal man would feel good seeing her, nor would a god who crossed her path. She has a dozen feet all deformed, 6 enormously long necks, with a horrific head on each of them, and 3 rows of teeth packed close together full of murky death. Her lower body she keeps in her hollow cave out of sight, but sticks her heads outside the fearful hole. No sailors yet can boast they and their ship sailed past her without disaster. Each of Scylla's heads carries off a man, snatching him away right off the dark proud ship. Weird detail about the sound she makes, maybe something made to sound pitiable and lure men in only to reveal the monster hidden inside the cave. Also, Cersei says no man has passed this close to Scylla and survived, and yet also says no man has passed the other way and survived except one, so given the choice between a path that one man survived because he had the blessing of the goddess and another path no one has survived, she recommends Scylla. That's a little bit odd, but alright. Freakish and deadly as all this sounds, Cersei recommends Odysseus keep to Scylla's rock, as opposite the strait, Charybdis gulps down black seawater, and whatever she swallows is destroyed beyond the reach of any god, even Poseidon himself. As Cersei puts it, make sure your ship stays close to Scylla's rock. Row past there with all speed. It's much better to mourn for 6 companions in your ship than to have them all wiped out together. So in the musical, Odysseus just knows this, but in the poem he knows this because Cersei told him about it. When in the poem Odysseus asks if he can fight back, Cersei rebukes him. You reckless man, you think you're dealing here with acts of war or work? Why won't you yield to the immortal gods? She's not human, but a destroyer who will never die, fearful, difficult, and fierce. Not someone you can fight. There's no defense against her. The bravest thing you can do is run away. If you linger by the cliff to arm yourself, I fear she'll jump out once more, attack you with all her heads, and snatch away 6 men just as before. Row on quickly past her as hard as you can go. A tough choice, though it does explain why Odysseus doesn't even try to fight back, an act for which Eurylochus and Ares criticize him in the musical. In fact, Odysseus even forgets Circe's instruction and does arm himself in the poem, searching for Scylla before she strikes. But the churning and bubbling whirlpool around Charybdis draws everyone's attention, and 6 men are snatched up screaming Odysseus' name as they're dragged into Scylla's lair. It doesn't match the events in the song Scylla exactly, but both versions are creepy and I absolutely love them. While there's no uprising from this as in the song Mutiny, there might have been a sense of betrayal. Odysseus had claimed to tell his crew all that Circe prophesied, but in truth he withheld the bit about Scylla. The latter half of the song's events do occur in the poem though, as Eurylochus persuades Odysseus to let the crew rest in Thrinacia, Island of the Sun, which Odysseus wanted to avoid due to the warning from the blind prophet Tiresias, a warning which Circe repeated. And sure enough, a storm strands them on the island for a month. Food storage runs low, and while Odysseus is sleeping, Eurylochus persuades the crew to slaughter the cattle. In a fit of rage, Helios demands Zeus punish the crew, or else he'll bring the sun down to the underworld, away from mortals and immortals alike. When the Achaeans set sail, Zeus obeys, conjuring another storm that, as depicted in Thunderbringer, destroys the ship and the entire crew. Odysseus barely survives, but he wakes up to find he has been swept back to Scylla and the whirlpool, and this is where we would get the song Charybdis. He just narrowly escapes by hanging onto a tree that looms over the beast until Charybdis spewed out the water she had been sucking in. When she does this, Odysseus clings to the broken timbers from the ship and paddles away, evading the whirlpool and Scylla's glare by the luck of the gods. He drifts for 10 days until he reaches Ogygia, Calypso's island, bringing us back to the beginning of the poem and to the song Love in Paradise. While Book 13 returns to the events with the Phaeacians, a plotline cut from the epic, it isn't without its parallels to the musical. The Phaeacians, amazed by the story and admiring the weary storyteller, fill a ship with gifts and deliver a sleeping Odysseus all the way back to Ithaca. But when Poseidon sees Odysseus on the Ithacan shores, resting with the gifts of the Phaeacians safely delivered, he grows furious and complains to Zeus. His words are reflected well in the musical's emphasis on ruthlessly securing fear and thereby respect. But the Shaker of the Earth had not forgotten those threats he once made against godlike Odysseus. So he asks Zeus what plan he had in mind. "Father Zeus, the immortal gods will honor me no more, for these men pay me no respect at all. For I clearly said Odysseus should suffer much misfortune before he made it home. I did not rob him of his return completely once you'd made that promise and confirmed it with a nod, but these men carried him while still asleep over the sea in their swift ship, set him in Ithaca, and gave him countless gifts." Zeus, acknowledging a god's right to avenge dishonors, lets him punish the Phaeacian crew. In what's functionally a reprise of the song Get in the Water, Poseidon turns the Phaeacian ship to stone, sinking it, and begins to raise a ring of mountains around their home. The awestruck Phaeacians sacrifice to Poseidon and swear never to help a wayfarer again, in what feels like some kind of origin story. It definitely gives us something to reflect on regarding the recurring motif of good hosts. Odysseus wakes up in Ithaca, but he fails to recognize it due to Athena's shroud. He had been away so long, and Pallas Athena, Zeus's daughter, had cast a mist around him to make him hard for people to identify, so she could tell him every detail, while his wife, his townsfolk, and his friends would not know who he was until the suitors' crimes had all been paid in full, and so all things seemed unfamiliar to their king. At first, Odysseus curses the Phaeacian crew, thinking they brought him to the wrong place. He even prays that Zeus will pay them back, which Zeus kind of already did, allowing Poseidon to get his revenge. Those poor Phaeacians, they literally just listened to Odysseus, fed him like good hosts do, and gave him more gifts than he had won in Troy, to say nothing of the safe passage home they provided him, and this is how they're repaid. But then Athena, now disguised as a shepherd boy, tells him that this is Ithaca. In a bit of a bizarre scene, Odysseus plays his hand at the disguise game too, fabricating an identity complete with a detailed backstory. He speaks, making things up, until Athena transforms into a woman, revealing her identity and confirming again that this is Ithaca. She praises his deception, while also making it clear that she is one-upping him in detecting and achieving trickery. Any man or even a god who ran into you would have to be a cunning charlatan to surpass your different kinds of trickery. You are bold and make complicated plans. You love deceit. Now, back in your homeland, it does not seem that you intend to stop your lies or making up those artful tales, which you love from the bottom of your heart. But come, let's no longer talk about this, for we both understand what shrewdness means. Of all men, you're the best in making plans and giving speeches, and among all gods, I'm well known for subtlety and wisdom. Still, you failed to recognize Athena, daughter of Zeus, who's always at your side, looking out for you in every crisis. This strange back and forth concealment game shares some parallels with the song Warrior of the Mind, though the goddess and man are friends in the endgame of the poem, rather than in the beginning as in the musical. The two plan together how Odysseus will use his wits to determine who is loyal, who is false, and how he will take his revenge on the suitors. Odysseus thanks Athena for enabling him to avoid the same fate as Agamemnon, a death in his own home. First step, Athena has Odysseus seek out Eumaeus, the swineherd, while she goes in search for Telemachus in Sparta. Odysseus, disguised as an old beggar, will spy out the events of his home. I see in the ending of the song The Challenge a little allusion to this moment. Now, note here how much time is left. We're entering the 8th and final song of the musical, but we're finishing book 13 out of 24 in the Odyssey. What leads to the end of the musical is just the midpoint of the poem, in which a disguised Odysseus will watch the events of his household and slowly, methodically build towards sweet revenge. In Book 14, the swineherd Eumaeus doesn't recognize Odysseus, but welcomes him in and speaks well of the lost king. "I'm full of sorrow for my noble master, who's probably going hungry someplace else as he wanders through the lands and cities where men speak a foreign tongue, if in fact he's still alive, looking at the sunlight. But follow me, old man, come in the hut, and when you have had enough to eat and drink and your heart satisfied, you can tell me where you come from, what hardships you've endured." Eumaeus gives Odysseus plenty to eat and complains about the suitors. Odysseus thanks Eumaeus for his good and proper hospitality. He pretends to be a vagabond, again with another long convoluted backstory that he spins on the spot. He says that he has heard Odysseus still lives somewhere, and he predicts that Eumaeus will see him again. But this Eumaeus doesn't believe Odysseus, saying many vagabonds have invented news of Odysseus trying to win favor with Penelope. While there's nothing here that parallels the musical, I do find it to be kind of a touching scene. Toward the end, Eumaeus has a boar killed, sets aside portions as an offering to Hermes and the nymphs, and gives a fine cut of meat to Odysseus, whom he believes to have lied about Odysseus living, but strangers are still deserving of respect, and Odysseus appreciates the treatment. Eumaeus, may Father Zeus treat you well as you are treating me with this boar's chine, the very finest cut of meat, even though I'm just a beggar. And Eumaeus replies, eat, God-guided stranger, and enjoy the kind of food we offer. I just love this tradition. In a world where gods come in and out of your life under different disguises, defaulting to the assumption that a stranger or a foreigner is God-guided, if not in fact a god, and treating them as such is such a cool way of incentivizing benevolence towards strangers. You never know if you're dealing with a god, so even if you don't like the company, you do fear the gods, and thus you treat travelers well. Love that. In Book 15, Athena travels to Sparta to bring Telemachus home. Remember way back in Book 4 when the diviner Medon overhears Antinous and Eurymachus plotting an ambush against Telemachus? Athena, now 11 books later, warns Telemachus of that same ambush. She tells him to find Eumaeus the swineherd, who will tell Penelope about his safe return. Menelaus and Helen give Telemachus gifts, and Telemachus thanks them, calling Menelaus Zeus-fostered king. How I wish when I returned to Ithaca I'd come across Odysseus in his home, so I could tell him how, when I left here, I'd met with every hospitality and taken many splendid gifts away. As they send him off, Helen sees an eagle with a snatched goose. She interprets the omen as a sign that Odysseus will return and exact revenge. Similarly, when the travelers land, Telemachus sees a hawk carrying a dove, which one Theoclymenus interprets as a sign of the strength of Odysseus's house, after almost 100 lines dedicated to this prophet's backstory. This motif is another recurring idea throughout the poem. A regal bird slays a common one, showing Odysseus's divine favor, even if the audience, say nothing of Odysseus himself, is occasionally allowed to doubt. While all this is going on, Eumaeus and Odysseus keep exchanging long stories, talking each other to sleep for almost 300 lines. During this tangential conversation, Eumaeus tells Odysseus about his father Laertes, and, with continued good treatment, shows he's a trustworthy and loyal servant of the house of Odysseus. The book concludes with Telemachus following Athena's instructions, evading the ambush, and heading toward Eumaeus, where, without knowing it, he will meet Odysseus as he wished and will be greeted warmly by the swineherd. This benevolence, from a king like Menelaus all the way to a lowly servant like Eumaeus, will soon be contrasted with the depravity of the suitors and their lack of hospitality. Book 16 begins with heartwarming reunions. First, the swineherd's dogs, which had barked at Odysseus, quietly fawn around Telemachus, something which perplexes the disguised Odysseus. He calls to the swineherd and says, "Eumaeus, some friend of yours is coming, or someone you know. The dogs aren't barking and are acting friendly. I hear footsteps." He hardly finished speaking when his own dear son stood in the doorway. The swineherd, amazed, jumped up. The bowls he was using to mix the gleaming wine fell from his hands. He went up to greet his master, kissed his head, both his handsome eyes and his 2 hands. Then through his tears he spoke. Telemachus finds Eumaeus talking to a stranger. Eumaeus tells Telemachus the fake backstory of the disguised Odysseus, and then goes to the palace to tell Penelope that her son has returned. Athena, who is watching all this, appears as a woman that only Odysseus can see. She calls him outside and tells him to reveal his identity to his son. With a touch of her golden wand, Odysseus returns to the hut and finds that his beggar disguise is gone. Telemachus and Odysseus embrace and weep, like in the beginning of the song, "I Can't Help But Wonder," though in the poem, the father-son reunion happens before Odysseus's revenge, and the two bond over a plotting of their pending violence. Odysseus will enter the palace as a beggar, and Telemachus will hide the arms where the suitors can't easily reach him. They'll then slaughter the suitors together, all part of the plot that eventually turns into the song Odysseus. While the two plot eagerly, there's a foreboding sense lingering over their scheming, articulated by Telemachus. "I fear revenge may bring a bitter fate. Now you've come home, so you should consider if you can think of anyone who will help, someone prepared to stand by both of us and fight with all his heart." The suitors, meanwhile, learn Telemachus returned and their plot failed. Here, the plotting encapsulated in the song "Hold Them Down" begins, with the suitor Antinous wanting to kill Telemachus. Another suitor named Amphinomus, one portrayed as wiser, just, and the most favored by Penelope, persuades them to wait for a sign from the gods. This Amphinomus is presented as a very empathetic problematic character, further complicating Odysseus's revenge plot. A bitter fate awaits them indeed. But the majority of the suitors are vile. Penelope, who has been kept in the know by the loyal prophet Medon, publicly denounces Antinous for his vile plans. But another suitor named Eurymachus uses lies and false concern for Telemachus to pacify her. Wise Penelope, child of Icarius, cheer up. Don't let these things concern your heart. No man living, no man born, and no one yet to be will lay hands on your son Telemachus, not while I'm alive, gazing on the earth. I tell you, and this will truly happen, that man's black blood will quickly saturate my spear, for Odysseus, sacker of cities, also sent me on his knees many times, and put roast meat into my hands, and held red wine up for me. Thus Telemachus is far the dearest of all men to me. I say to him, don't be afraid of death. Not from the suitors, but there's no way out when our death comes from the immortal gods. He said these words to ease her mood, while he himself was planning how her son would die. Athena, meanwhile, puts the beggar disguise back on Odysseus with her wand, and the father and son rest, with the returned swineherd regaining their strength to begin carrying out their vengeful plan. You'd think in the morning father and son would then storm the palace and Odysseus would reunite with Penelope. You'd be wrong. Book 17 begins with Telemachus reuniting with Penelope and telling her about his journey, but he hides the gifts from Menelaus and Helen, as well as the news of Odysseus' return. A strange move, as immediately after the prophet Theoclymenus prophesies that Odysseus is in that very moment there in Ithaca. Meanwhile, Odysseus and Eumaeus go to town where one of the disloyal servants, Melanthius, insults them. Now here we have a truly filthy man leading another filthy scoundrel. As always, a god matches like with like. You wretched swineherd, where are you off to with this disgusting pig, this beggar man, a tedious bore who will interrupt our feasts? Since he's picked up his thieving habits, he has no urge to cope with real work. No, he'd rather creep around the country and beg food to fill his bottomless gut. Odysseus wants to kill Melanthius then and there, but he checks his fury and the two move on, heading toward the palace. Then we get one of the worst parts of the Odyssey. Warning, this part sucks if you like dogs. Then a dog, prone in the dirt, raised its head and pricked up its ears. It was Argus, brave Odysseus' hunting dog, whom he himself had brought up many years ago. Argus lay there, covered in fleas, but then when he saw Odysseus, who was coming closer, Argus wagged his tail and dropped his ears. But he no longer had the strength to approach his master. Odysseus looked away and brushed aside a tear. He did so casually to hide it from Eumaeus. Odysseus asks Eumaeus about the dog, and the swineherd explains that Argus had once been a handsome hunting dog, but after his master disappeared, the slaves neglected him and left him among the animal dung. The sad conclusion to this short story, but once he'd seen Odysseus after 19 years, Argus died, seized by the fatal clutch of death. A nice middle finger from Homer there. But no time to dwell on this, because the poem hurriedly switches to when Odysseus and Eumaeus join Telemachus for dinner that evening. Athena urges Odysseus to beg for bread from the suitors. When he does, that same insulting Melanthius from earlier joins with Antinous in mocking the swineherd and beggar and refusing them food. These suitors are the opposite of hospitable hosts. Odysseus tries to appeal to Antinous' plainly apparent wealth, but Antinous is less than gracious in his reply. What god sent this nuisance to interrupt our feast? Leave my table alone. Go over there. You're an insolent and shameless beggar. Odysseus returns the insult, saying that his mind doesn't match his regal noble looks, and Antinous responds by throwing a stool at him. By the way, the stool explodes when it hits Odysseus' shoulder. The beggar doesn't budge an inch. Antinous' aggression was a step too far for even many of the suitors. When Penelope hears about this, she asks Eumaeus to bring this beggar to her, but Odysseus refuses for the time being, fearing the violence of the suitors, which no one present was willing or able to stop. Eumaeus delivers the message, and as he departs for home, he whispers to Telemachus, "You take charge of what's going on in here. First and foremost, protect yourself. Your heart must stay alert so you don't suffer harm. Many Achaeans are hatching evil plans. May Zeus kill them all before they harm us." The tension in the palace is palpable, the drama building and building as we draw nearer to the much anticipated scene of revenge. In book 18, a beggar named Eris Eurus picks a fight with Odysseus, and when the suitors notice, they surround the beggars with the equivalent of a fight, fight chant, even promising a rich meal to the victor. Athena enhances Odysseus' strength, and he dominates the fight, as if the song Little Wolf were about Odysseus instead of Telemachus. The suitors applaud and praise Odysseus after his absolute victory over Eurus. Odysseus was happy at such friendly words. Antinous set down by him the immense goat stomach stuffed full of blood and fat, and Amphinomus picked 2 loaves of bread from the basket, placed them before Odysseus, and then toasted him with a golden cup, saying, "Greetings, honored stranger. Though right now you're facing many miseries, may happiness be yours in future days." Amphinomus seems like such a nice, sincere guy. You'd almost expect him to be spared among the suitors. When Odysseus responds to the gift and toast, he even compliments and tries to surreptitiously warn Amphinomus. I see suitors here planning desperate acts, wasting the wealth and dishonoring the wife of a man who I think will not remain away for long. Not from his family and native soil. He is close by. May some god lead you home, and may you not have to confront the man whenever he comes back to his own house. Amphinomus is distressed by this, but he stays at the palace. Athena has bound him to be killed by Telemachus, and no man is allowed to escape his fate. Athena then starts her own scheming. She transforms Penelope into a taller, refined, and queenly figure and inspires Penelope to address the suitors. She tells them that Odysseus had instructed her to take a new husband if he fails to return before Telemachus grows facial hair. The suitors, inflamed and quite thirsty, are tricked into bringing her gifts, trying to win her favor. Odysseus, who's listening to all this, loves the gift-giving ploy, and he tries to get a maidservant Melantho to go to Penelope, but Melantho only insults him as a drunk. Athena inspires Eurymachus, a suitor who's secretly sleeping with the servant Melantho, to insult Odysseus. Odysseus insults him back, and Eurymachus throws another stool, but this one accidentally hits a servant. A riot almost breaks out, but Telemachus and the wise suitor Amphinomus help restore order. Tension is building, and not even the servants can be trusted to be loyal to the house of Odysseus. In Book 19, Odysseus and Telemachus finally start putting their plan into action. They remove and conceal all the weapons, with Athena lighting the way before them. The servant Melantho, from earlier, again insults Odysseus, but Penelope discovers them, chastises the servant, and then questions Odysseus. After what feels like some stress venting and yet another elaborate backstory that Odysseus fabricates on the spot, lying to his wife, she decides to test him, asking questions about her husband to see if the disguised beggar really knows what he's talking about. His perfect answer brings her to tears, and he predicts Odysseus will return within a month, still keeping himself concealed from her. The whole exchange is a very strange mix of sweet but also cruel. She kept weeping for her husband, the man sitting there beside her. Lord Odysseus in his heart felt great pity for his grieving wife, but he held his eyes steady between his eyelids like horn or iron, and he kept up his deceit and concealed his tears. So he couldn't hold back when the bard was singing about his own epic deeds, but when he sees his wife crying for him right there, then he can hold back his tears. What a guy. Could he have revealed the truth to her then and there? Maybe, but remember, there are servants around, and Odysseus doesn't know who he can trust. He doesn't know if she can even be trusted. Even though Agamemnon assured him Penelope must be different from Clytemnestra, the stakes get higher when Penelope offers a bed and bath for the beggar, a bath being the very setting in which Clytemnestra ensnared and killed Agamemnon. Understandably, Odysseus is wary. He asks if a servant could help with the bath. The good handmaid Eurycleia washes his feet when she discovers something, a scar. We have here a possible connection to the musical. I've seen it suggested that the story of the Caledonian boar inspired that backstory in the song Warrior of the Mind when Athena and Odysseus meet. While that might be the case, I think the story of the scar could also have been inspiration. Years ago, while hunting in Parnassus, a boar had charged Odysseus from a thicket. Both were injured, but Odysseus emerged victorious. Perhaps, with how often Athena has been watching over Odysseus in one form or another, it's not a leap to assume that she observed this triumph over the wild creature. Seeing the scar, Eurycleia suddenly recognizes Odysseus. Athena distracts Penelope while the old handmaid embraces Odysseus, who silences her quite forcefully. Odysseus' arms reached out for Eurycleia. With his right hand, he grabbed her firmly by the throat, and with the other pulled her even closer to him. Then he said, "My good mother, why this wish to have me slaughtered? Stay silent silent, so in these halls no one finds out. For I'll tell you something, and it will happen. If gods overcome these haughty suitors, set them at my feet, I will not spare you, though you are my nurse, when I kill other women in my home. Jeez. Eurycleia is described as prudent for, rather than insulting Odysseus as Melantho had, instead aligning with him, not that she had much other choice, and promising to rat out all the women who hadn't stayed loyal. Odysseus says he doesn't need her help, but he does seem to be pacified by this. Penelope decides to go to bed, but before departing, she tells disguised Odysseus of a dream in which an eagle had killed 20 geese around her. Odysseus affirms the interpretation. The suitors will fall to Odysseus. But Penelope is unconvinced. She tells the beggar about her plan. There will be a contest for the suitors. Her hand in marriage for the first man who can shoot an arrow through the hole of 12 axes in a line. It's the famous contest referenced in the song The Challenge, and Odysseus encourages her to go forward with it, assuring her Odysseus will return before one suitor has accomplished the task. While Penelope often seems helpless in the poem, waiting around or being told what to do, especially by Telemachus, some people have interpreted this particular scene as a coded communication between the husband and wife, who quietly recognizes him. She's tested his knowledge of her husband, dropped the clue from her dream that she knows what's happening, and then gives him information to prepare. There will be a contest in which Odysseus's bow will be available for any man who can wield it. Maybe she's playing a part in his conniving. Book 20 is the calm before the storm. Both Penelope and Odysseus are struggling to sleep. This I read as Odysseus's moment of reflection, though instead of a midway wrap-up in which Odysseus decides to take action as we see in the song Monster, the reflection comes at the end, and Odysseus is trying to keep the monster contained for one more night. He struck his chest and said, rebuking his own heart, "Hang on, my heart, you went through troubles worse than this that day the Cyclops in his frantic rage devoured your courageous comrades. You held out then until your cunning led you from that cave where you thought you would die." He said these words to calm the heart within his chest, and his spirit submitted, bravely resolving to endure it all. Here and later in Odysseus's big moment of vengeance, he questions himself, feeling particularly human, as in the song Just a Man. Only here he is questioning his ability to kill all the suitors, rather than Hector's child. Athena calms Odysseus by reminding him that with the gods, all things are possible. Penelope, meanwhile, struck by guilt for deciding to remarry, prays for Artemis to kill her. A sign that maybe her earlier communication with the disguised Odysseus wasn't some coded way of saying, "I recognize you." Maybe she actually was deciding to remarry. She, however, gets no god's comfort, but also no arrow to the chest. In the morning, Odysseus asks Zeus for 2 good omens, one outside and one inside the palace. He receives both, a clap of thunder outside, and a maid nearby who curses the suitors inside. Odysseus and Telemachus continue to scout the suitors and servants, quietly judging each of them. Eumaeus and the cowherd Philoetius are deemed still loyal to Odysseus, but Melanthius, the goatherd, is not. Suitors plot yet again to kill Telemachus. Amphinomus yet again persuades them not to, and Athena keeps the suitors wicked, mocking and laughing to sharpen Odysseus's anger. Cue a reprisal of Hold Them Down. And again, we get another bird omen. An eagle appears carrying a dove, and the walls of the room where they dine are coated in blood, signs the suitors fail to notice, but that Theoclymenus interprets as portents of inescapable doom. It's worth taking a moment here to reflect on the repetitive nature of the poem. It could be that this is a poetic repetition, the same motif recurring, but with slight variations, emphasizing or playing with an idea. It could also be building suspense. Remember, this was an oral tradition. Maybe like we have TV shows where successive episodes revisit and recap older ideas to keep the main plot fresh in the mind of the viewers. This poem had a sort of episodic feel to the audience that would hear occasional tales of Odysseus. It's also possible that this is a sign of multiple authors or variations on a story, narratives that could have circulated separately, which result in redundancies, repetition, or sometimes even contradiction when they were later compiled and brought together into one narrative. So keep in mind what I just said about repetition, because Book 21 encapsulates the songs The Challenge, again, and Hold Them Down. yet again. Though this is probably the best encapsulation of these. It begins with Athena prompting Penelope, again, to announce to the suitors the contest with the bow, which bow has its own full backstory. She says, "Listen to me, bold suitors who've been ravaging this home with your incessant need for food and drink. Now that my husband's been away so long, the only story you could offer up as an excuse is that you all desire to marry me and take me as your wife. So come now, suitors, since I seem to be the prize you seek, I'll place this great bow here, a weapon that belonged to brave Odysseus. Whichever one of you can grip this bow and string it with the greatest ease, then shoot an arrow through 12 axes, all of them. I'll go with him, leaving my married home, this truly lovely house, and all these goods one needs for living, things I'll remember even in my dreams." Sometimes it kind of seems like Penelope loves the palace as much as, if not more than, Odysseus. Telemachus sets up the weapons and kind of fails in his own attempt to string the bow. Telemachus quickly threw off the purple cloak covering his back, then jumped up and removed the sharp sword hanging from his shoulders. Then, going and standing in the threshold, he tried to test the bow. 3 times he made it tremble as he strove to bend it, and 3 times he relaxed, hoping in his heart he'd string that bow and shoot an arrow through the iron. On his 4th attempt, as his power bent the bow, he might have strung it, but Odysseus shook his head, signaling him to stop for all his eagerness. Telemachus spoke out, addressing them once more with royal authority. "Well, I suppose I'll remain a coward, but come now, you men who are more powerful than me, test this bow. Let's end this competition." I love that moment, just kind of showing the son like the father, but deliberately choosing to be seen as less competent. I think that's a cool little bit of deception. Well, the suitors all try, and they all fail as well. Meanwhile, Odysseus reveals his identity to the good servants, Eumaeus and Philoetius, promising to treat them as brothers if they will help him in the fight. They weep, kiss his head and shoulders, and agree to help lock the suitors inside. When Odysseus returns, Antinous is suggesting the suitors give up for the day, sacrifice to the archer god Apollo, and try again tomorrow. When Odysseus takes the bow, a drunk Antinous mocks him. Penelope, who has been watching this, says the beggars deserve a right, but the suitors mock the thought, and even Telemachus steps in to tell his mother to go attend to her duties. She obeys, and Athena casts a sleep on her, probably for the best considering what's about to happen. Odysseus whispers to Eurycleia to ensure the doorway to the women's quarters keeps locked, no matter what anyone hears going on inside. Odysseus then easily strings the bow, and, holding it in his right hand, he tested the string. It sang out, resonating like a swallow's song beneath his touch. Grief overwhelms the suitors. The skin on all of them changed color, and then Zeus gave out an ominous sign, a peal of thunder. Then he picked up a swift arrow lying by itself on the table there beside him. The other ones, which those Achaeans soon would be familiar with, foreshadowing, were stored inside the hollow quiver. He set it against the bow on the bridge, pulled the notched arrow and the bowstring back, still sitting in his seat, and with a sure aim let it fly. It did not miss, not even a single hole in the axe heads. The arrow, weighted with bronze, sped straight on through and out the other end. Odysseus gives his son a sign, and Telemachus takes his sword and spear and takes a stand next to his dad, quote, fully armed and gleaming with bronze. And we've arrived. Book 22 is the song Odysseus, the massacre of the suitors. I just have to read you the first lines of this section. Resourceful Odysseus stripped off his rags, grabbed up the bow and quiver full of arrows, and sprang up, moving to the doorway. He dumped his swift arrows beside his feet and then shouted at the suitors, "This contest to determine who was best is over, but there's another target, one no man has ever struck. I'll find out if I can hit it. May Apollo grant I get the glory." As Odysseus spoke, he aimed a bitter arrow straight at Antinous, who was just about to raise up to his lips a fine double-handled goblet he was holding in his hands so he could drink some wine. In his heart, there was not a thought of slaughter. Among those feasting, who would ever think in such a crowd of people that one man, even if his strength was truly great, would risk confronting evil death, his own black fate? Odysseus took aim and hit him with an arrow right through the neck. Its point passed through his tender throat. He slumped over on his side, and as he was hit, the goblet fell to the ground, and thick spurts of blood came flowing quickly from his nose. At first, the suitors think this was an accident, but pale fear seizes them as Odysseus reveals himself. They run, but the doors are locked. Eurymachus tries to insist Antinous was the only bad one among them, but Odysseus announces none will be spared and kills him with another arrow. Amphinomus, the only noble suitor whose fate had been sealed, then falls to Telemachus's spear. Telemachus arms Eumaeus and Philoetius, but leaves the storeroom unlocked. Melanthius, the bad servant from earlier, gets in and arms the suitors, but the good servants Eumaeus and Philoetius find him, tie him up, and lock him inside. Athena then appears as Mentor, the steward of the house, and has a bit of a fight with Odysseus, who, again, as he was in Book 20, is questioning himself. The fight is almost reminiscent of My Goodbye, though instead of Athena saying, "You've changed and I'm out," she's now saying, "Prove to me that you haven't changed, or else I'm out. Odysseus, you no longer have that firm spirit and force you once possessed, when for 9 years you fought against the Trojans over white-armed Helen, who was nobly born. You never stopped. You slaughtered many men in fearful combat. Through your stratagems, Priam's city of broad streets was taken. So how come now, when you are in your home with your own possessions, you are moaning about acting bravely with these suitors? Come on now, my friend, stand here beside me. See what I do." She's basically trying to convince him, your glory days are not all in the past. Now, Athena does not lend him her full strength yet, still testing the power and resolution of Odysseus and Telemachus. Disguising herself as a swallow, she flies onto the roof of the smoky hall and watches them fight. That said, Odysseus fights well, and Athena protects him and those loyal to him from fatal blows as they, including the old herdsmen, slaughter the suitors. One prophet, Leodes, grabs Odysseus' knee and begs him for pity, insisting he tried to stop the suitors, but they wouldn't listen. Odysseus decapitates him. But when one minstrel named Phemius does the same, holding Odysseus' knee and pleading for mercy, saying he was coerced to sing for the suitors, Telemachus actually affirms the innocence of the minstrel and the herald Medon. So Odysseus isn't wholly without mercy in this massacre. But remember Odysseus' conversation with the good handmaid Eurycleia. His revenge is not yet complete. After the slaughter of the suitors, Odysseus has the old handmaid come out and round up the disloyal servant women. These women are forced to clean up the corpses, wash the furniture clean of blood, and then go outside to be executed themselves. Odysseus tells Telemachus to kill them all with a sword, but this time Telemachus is the one advocating for no mercy. "I don't want to take these women's lives with a clean death. They poured insults on my head, on my mother, and were always sleeping with the suitors." He decides to hang them instead, a more disgraceful death. Finally, the disloyal swineherd Melanthius is tortured and killed by castration and dismemberment. Odysseus' revenge complete, he purifies the house and reunites with the faithful servants. Book 23 brings the long-awaited reunion, but it's far from romantic. The good handmaid Eurycleia wakes up Penelope, who slept through all of this. She believes none of the reports, even after seeing Odysseus with her own eyes. Telemachus rebukes her, he does this a lot, for not greeting Odysseus more lovingly. Crossing the stone threshold, she went in and sat down by the fire opposite Odysseus, beside the further wall. He was just sitting there, by a tall pillar, looking at the ground, waiting to find out if his noble wife would speak to him when she saw him with her own eyes. But she sat down and stayed silent a long time, wonder in her heart. Sometimes her eyes looked straight at him full in the face, but other times she failed to recognize him. He had such shabby clothes covering his limbs. Telemachus spoke up, addressing a rebuke directly at her. "Mother, you're a cruel woman with an unfeeling heart. Why turn aside from my father in this way? Why not sit over there close to him, ask him questions? No other woman's heart would be so hard to make her this distant from a husband who's come home to her in his native land in the 20th year after surviving so many hard ordeals. That heart of yours is always harder than stone." Not sure I'd agree with that. Clytemnestra didn't seem quite too warmly receiving of her husband. Take it easy, Telemachus. Odysseus ends up suggesting that a bath might help, always a good idea. He adds that they, having slain all the young nobles of Ithaca, will probably need to lay low for a while. A minstrel even sings a wedding song so that the only rumor passers-by outside will spread is one of some lucky suitor somewhere. Odysseus comes out of the bath blessed by Athena to look like an immortal god, but Penelope, still wary of a trick of the god, sends Eurycleia to move her bridal bed, and this request infuriates Odysseus. You'll know why if you remember the song, "Would You Fall in Love with Me Again?" He explains that the bed was built from the trunk of an olive tree and it is immovable. This moment has the potential to be a two-way test. past. Odysseus, who has had the question of women's loyalty planted in him from the beginning, might see this as a hint of her betrayal. She has forgotten her wedding bed. But Penelope could be testing Odysseus the same way. She may not know about his experiences with the Caconis women, or his affairs with Circe or Calypso, but she could safely assume he has not been fully devoted to her for the last 20 years. Maybe she is asking him the same question. Do you remember our wedding bed? What has been a tense scene so far melts with Odysseus' answer. Now you get the romantic reunion. Odysseus spoke, and sitting there, Penelope felt a weakness in her knees, and her heart grew soft. Eyes full of tears, she ran across to him, threw her arms around his neck, and kissed his head. Penelope spoke and stirred in him an even more intense desire to weep. As he held his loyal and loving wife, he shed tears. And you'd love to have the story end there as it does in the musical, but not yet. The reunited lovers can't relax. He tells her the countless tasks that lay ahead, not least of which he has to appease Poseidon per the prophecy of Tiresias and Hades. Yeah, he casually drops to her that he was in the underworld, and it's not an issue. Penelope says that he can go and do whatever he needs to do. He'll always have a bed in his home, in his own land. Must have sounded nice. Telemachus pulls all the servants away, and Odysseus and Penelope make love. Afterward, Odysseus tells her the story, the true story this time, of his adventures, which might sound like another nice ending, but he begins with the massacre of the Cacones, which I have a hard time imagining was too endearing for Penelope. One is left to wonder her reaction to the scenes with Nausicaa, Circe, and Calypso. After his story, he says that he needs to go visit his dad, and she is to stay here to see to their wealth and not to visit with anyone. Sounds like he's still got some trust issues. Then he, Telemachus, and the loyal servants Eumaeus and Philoetius put on their armor, take their weapons, and head out, cloaked in darkness by Athena. There's one more book ahead. The poem's conclusion is deleted from the musical, which I think was a good choice. What could possibly be left to tell? Well, book 24, you'll never guess this, goes back to the suitors. Hermes is escorting them down to Hades, and we get one more underworld scene. Agamemnon and Achilles are arguing over who had the better death. The suitor Amphimedon, not to be confused with Amphinomus, this Amphimedon is a nephew of Agamemnon, tells Agamemnon about their deaths, blaming Penelope over anyone else. It's always the woman's fault. Agamemnon doesn't at all seem to care that his nephew was one of Penelope's suitors, nor that he was killed. No, Agamemnon hears all this and just smiles and says, "Oh, happy Odysseus." He's jealous that Penelope was constant while Clytemnestra was treacherous. If Agamemnon establishes the question of a loyal spouse, and Achilles of nostos, a term meaning return home, over kleos, glory, both of the fallen heroes of Troy learn here that the clever, wily Odysseus has achieved all that the two heroes couldn't have: glory, home, and a loyal wife. Happy Odysseus indeed. Odysseus, meanwhile, arrives at the farm of his father Laertes, but his old father doesn't even recognize him. When Laertes asks who he is, Odysseus says that he'll tell him everything quite truthfully, and then proceeds to invent yet another backstory, this time pretending to be one of Odysseus's friends. I swear, lying is a compulsion for him at this point. Can't blame him too much though. The last time he told the truth, he incurred the wrath of a god, and no, I'm not counting the tale to the Phaeacians or whatever he told his wife. There's too much room for a bardic tale to assume that everything that came out of his mouth was true. After Odysseus's final fabricated story, Laertes cries at the memory of his son. Not 10 lines after the lie, this happens. He jumped over, embraced Laertes, kissed him, and then said, "Father, I'm here, the very man you asked about. I've returned here in the 20th year, back to my native land. Stop your grieving, these tearful sighs, I'll tell you everything, although we have to move with all due speed. I've killed the suitors in our home, avenged their evil and heart-rending insolence." One more instance of a disguise and a revelation, and another heartwarming reunion cut short because he just massacred a bunch of nobles. He shows his father his scar and tells him of the revenge, which really stresses old Laertes out. And of course, rumors start spreading across the city of the massacre. The prophets Medon and Halitherses say that Odysseus was backed by the gods and the suitors got what they deserved, but one Eupathes, father of Antinous, encourages the suitors' parents to seek revenge. Admittedly, Apparently, this Odysseus had marched away 20 years ago with their sons to a war from which none of them returned, only to proceed to massacre more of their sons. Can't really blame Eupathes too much. An angry mob marches on Laertes' house, but Athena intervenes one last time. She confronts Zeus in what could have been a God Games reprise, asks if he's trying to start a war, and Zeus asks what she expected from the slaughter. This was her plan, and he's going to let her see it through to the end. So Athena, disguised again as Mentor, puts a stop to the violence. She whispers to Laertes and breathes into him enormous power. The father stands, lifts his long spear, and throws it through Eupathes. The father of Antinous is the only casualty of this final battle. Odysseus even tries to massacre the fleeing army, but a bolt from Zeus toward Athena jolts her into action. She pacifies Odysseus as she did his opponents. In the end, Athena, disguised one last time as Mentor, has both parties sign a treaty, recognizing Odysseus as king and finally restoring peace. And that is the end of the Odyssey. It's over. There's nothing more. There really isn't anything more, and it's probably for the best that we've lost the final epic, Telegony. There's nothing there worth looking at. Nothing about Odysseus subsequently leaving Penelope to marry another woman. Nothing about Odysseus' son that he had with Circe, Telegonus, not to be confused with Telemachus, finding and killing Odysseus. And we're definitely going to ignore Telemachus marrying Circe and Telegonus marrying Penelope. Let's just add another STI point and wrap this up. The musical had a much better ending than the poem. So, what would the musical epic look like if it was rearranged to match the chronology of the poem? Well, as you heard many times throughout this, the songs were repetitive because the poem was repetitive. So, I've organized here in my chart my tracking of the songs of epic, as well as the books of the Odyssey. Here on the far column, I have put all the songs just once. If I had to choose the best representation of that poem somewhere in the musical, this is the sequence that we would have. Feel free to create a playlist and listen to them in this order, see what it does to the story. I find it interesting. And for some reason, I just really love that it begins with Love in Paradise, this idea of where have you been, and revisiting like beats from the whole musical as kind of a prelude of things to come. I don't know, I just find it fun. All that said, there are a couple songs that are so much a stretch, it might be better to say they don't even feature in the poem at all. Note the presence of Just a Man, Monster, and Different Beast. There really isn't any reflection on the quality of the character Odysseus, not to the extent that we get in the musical. By far, I would say that Epic is an excellent conversion of the poem into a musical for modern audiences. The rampant infidelity and possessive rhetoric toward women were removed, while exploring the necessity of violence was retained without the need in reveling in violence. Lots of repetitive ideas were condensed into one song to communicate the event or themes being explored, trimming the story into a narrative that focused on some core characters and questions. In particular, I like the chopping off of the whole section with the Phaeacians and large chunks of the Revenge saga. I think these were good choices. I actually really like that the poem repeatedly alluded to other narratives outside of the Odyssey, from Troy to Clytemnestra, but I totally understand why these were removed from the musical. Just saying though, if anyone wants to continue past plans to create a musical of Ilium, to keep turning classical stories into musicals, I think the tragedies of Clytemnestra and Medea would be excellent places to go next. One more thought on Clytemnestra. It's interesting to me how often people associate the Trojan horse in conjunction with the Odyssey, but not the death of Agamemnon, and how that clearly affected the Greeks, including Odysseus himself. The Trojan horse is not a plot point in the Odyssey. It's mentioned less than half the number of times that Agamemnon and Clytemnestra are. I mean, the first and the last books of the epic poem feature Agamemnon. If I had to pick one section that was cut from the Odyssey to be placed in the musical, I'd probably ask for the Lystragonians to have their appearance. I don't think it was a bad move to move the giant's destruction to Poseidon. I mean, without this, he and Odysseus wouldn't meet until Get in the Water, so it worked to establish Poseidon as the antagonist much earlier on, showing that ruthlessness. That was brilliant construction of a plot. That said, I'd just love to see the scouting and the urgent flight from the giants of Telepylus. One thing I found most intriguing while looking at the musical versus the epic poem was the effect of the shifting focus. Only about a third of the poem focuses on the events that are in the musical. Odysseus' famous journey across the Mediterranean comprises books 9 through 12, only 4 of the 24 books in the poem. The second half of the poem is condensed down to 1/8 of the musical. The result of this was a musical primarily focused on one question: what will it take for Odysseus to make it back home? The epic poem, meanwhile, is sprawling with several ideas and characters to be explored. One of the most famous themes, which I reference over and over again, is xenia, guest friendship, the idea of how a good host treats a traveler. The big crimes that made Polyphemus and the suitors wicked were their lack of hospitality. Calypso, Circe, the Phaeacians, Nestor, Menelaus, Eumaeus, even Telemachus, these were all characters eager to be gracious hosts, complying with the moral law that Zeus demands. This was one method Odysseus used to judge whom he would spare and kill while observing Ithaca disguised as a beggar. Another idea heavily explored by the poem and largely retained by the musical is nostos, the homeward voyage, giving us our word nostalgia. Odysseus longs to return home, but this is impeded in many ways, not all of them the will of the gods or natural fates. Often it's the ones longing to return themselves who prevent their own successful return journey. One can't help but wonder while reading the poem what might prevent Odysseus from reaching Ithaca. Will it be an angry god, a violent monster, a traitorous wife, or his own ineptitude? Sprinkled throughout the poem are words like hubris, giving us hubris, pride, insolence, and arrogance that could carry a man so far as to defy even the gods. There's moros, foolish, stupid, giving us our word moron. There's aphrosine, senselessness, folly. The famous example of this is when Odysseus chose to shout out to the Cyclops his name, his father's name, his homeland, his birthday, his social security number, but Odysseus was messing up from the beginning all the way to the end. He got too complacent when raiding the Cacones at the onset of his return, and he lost several men from that alone. His men had to pull him off Aiaia. Why he was content to stay with Circe but not Calypso could be a matter of debate. Maybe he would have stayed if he had his crew, or maybe he would have grown tired of Circe with time. Ojija just didn't feel like home, but neither did home. He was ready to massacre even more Ithacans at the very end of the poem, who were justifiably upset in the last book. If Athena wasn't there to bail Odysseus out or to restrain his violent impulses, Odysseus would have been chilling with Achilles and Agamemnon in the underworld in no time. This presents a question that one could explore in both the poem and the musical. Is Odysseus a good guy? The murder and enslavement of the Caconis was horrible, but so was the way Odysseus talked to his own servants, both Eurycleia and Melantho. Before Odysseus knew the extent of Melantho's closeness with the suitors, he was vile in a way I didn't even want to read out loud. You can read it here if you want. Further, I'm not sure we could blame or should blame the servants of the house for moving on. How much agency does a young slave like Melantho have? And the suitors were quite clearly going to take over. Can you really blame her for exploring what few options she has to try to secure some safe position with whomever seems most likely to become the next master? Odysseus was quick to condemn, but also quick to err himself. How mad can you be at Polyphemus for not being a gracious host to thieves? Odysseus is often portrayed as moping around and as an ineffective captain. He was dragging his men home only to get stuck with a Cyclops and enchanted by Circe, and he then concealed some of her words of warning from his crew, getting them killed by Scylla and the wrath of Helios. I'm not sure telling the crew would have even helped that much. They clearly didn't trust him when it came to the windbag from Aeolus, and he had gotten so many killed by both the Cacones and the Lystragonians. So he was a man quick to anger, a serial womanizer, an inept captain, hypocritical, and his glory days were all in the past. Even later authors condemned Odysseus. Virgil wrote scathingly about him in the Aeneid, though of course he was writing from the Trojan perspective. They're going to hate Odysseus. But even Dante wrote that Odysseus was condemned to the 8th circle of hell, a place reserved for the fraudulent, in his Inferno. The musical epic leans into this moral ambiguity well. The first songs deal with the murder of an infant, which he later says he would do again if it was what it took to get home. Eurylochus wants to trust Odysseus, but he has doubts. And what is Odysseus' plan? Suppress those doubts, become a yes man. That's never led to problems before. Eventually, Eurylochus feels forced to mutiny, and one can't really blame him. Tiresias gives Odysseus a prophecy of what he'll find in Ithaca, but all of his words can be interpreted with double meanings. His wife, with a haunting man leaving a trail of bodies. Is Tiresias talking about Antinous, Odysseus himself, both? One of my favorite parallels in the musical is the monster Scylla saying, "We are the same, you and I," as she picks off Odysseus's men, specifically the one carrying torches, which Odysseus told Eurylochus to give them right after Eurylochus confessed to opening the wind bag. It was as if he was punishing Eurylochus for his distrust of him by having to choose the crewmen who would then be consumed. And then paralleling this, in the raid of the palace in Ithaca, it's Odysseus who has become the Scylla-like monster as the panicking suitors realize he's aiming for the torches. He and Scylla really are the same, doing what they have to do to survive, even if it means being a monster. The poem and the musical approach this question differently, but they do each allow an audience member to both see the good and the bad to contemplate their protagonist. One of my favorite adaptations into the musical, though, is the character Athena. I originally wrote in my notes that her myriad of disguises was removed from the musical, and that might be the case. I might be stretching a bit here, but I think I was actually wrong writing that. Listen to the first time she sings the word mind in the song Warrior of the Mind. She holds the note out, loud, strong, unwavering, certain of her path and identity. Then she meets Odysseus, and note the difference. She holds the note out long, keeping strong, and Odysseus plays with the melody. Then in the final chorus, see what happens. This time they sing together. She adapts to his method. This subtle moment actually seems to be a pattern for Athena's character throughout the musical. Over and over she is shown as musically adapting to her surroundings. When you see her again, she's helping Telemachus in the song Little Wolf. She adopts the melody, but also the metaphor of the taunting suitors. Antinous wants to teach the little wolf, Telemachus, a lesson. Athena storms in to teach the dogs a lesson, turning the wolf from an insult into a badge of pride. One young wolf has a larger heart than all these men. Her certainty in the song This Is My Goodbye from earlier, as she departs the proud Odysseus, turns into the repeated word maybe in We'll Be Fine, as she aligns with Odysseus's son, where she dismisses her earlier rejection of Odysseus's friendship in Warrior of the Mind by referring to Telemachus's dad as an old friend. The clearest example of Athena's adaptation is in the song God Games. Athena combats with the ideas and the melodies of each god one by one, meeting them on their own stage, changing her approach to beat them at their own song, until she reaches one god in particular, Ares. It's when he condemns Odysseus for never taking a stand, never fighting his own fight, that Athena, instead of taking Ares' approach, takes a stand and goes back to her own melody of Warrior of the Mind, and she screams her reply back at the war god, giving him what he asked for, her own fight. But then right after this, she abandons this take a stand mindset when, after insulting Zeus in order to win over Hera, she realizes what the king of gods needs to be pacified. He needs to win. So she lets him, bows to the king, and gives him his victory to secure her own. When she is reunited with Odysseus, she takes the melody of the song of the father and son's reunion and sings to Odysseus as a wholly different person than she had been at the beginning. Instead of insisting her way is right, it's my way or the highway like she said at the beginning, she says that she's led him astray. In place of orders, she asks questions. Instead of looking for a human she could mold into someone with a mind like her own, she has molded herself into someone like the human she found. She has changed. Now, how do you show a goddess of change, deceit, and disguise in a musical format? Well, play to the strength of your genre. Again, I don't know if this was deliberate, but I see Athena's musical fluidity as she adopts new melodies and mindsets as the exact same kind of diplomacy that she wields through disguises in the poem. Intended or not, the result of the musical allows for that kind of insight, and I look forward to seeing Ilium as it comes out. How will the themes of that epic war story be turned into musical format? Are we going to see Kleos now fully embraced? And what questions will be presented for us to consider? I'm also eagerly awaiting Christopher Nolan's Odyssey movie with the question in mind of how he will adapt the poem into a screenplay. I don't usually like to make predictions, but I do like to think through options. The musical's changes took the poem and made it more centered on character. Nolan's films, however, usually sideline character in favor of concept, some idea Nolan likes to tinker with. His characters usually exist in order to examine that concept from different angles. He particularly likes ideas that are a little mind-bendy. Non-linear stories are his favorite, and personally I think he did this best with one of his first films, Memento. So keeping his interests in mind, what options would Nolan have to play with from the poem The Odyssey? Well, the poem is non-linear, so that's an option. It begins with the gods asking whatever happened to Odysseus, and then it plays out almost like a mystery as Telemachus investigates the whereabouts of his missing father. This investigation leads him to learn about events in the recent past, the murders of Agamemnon and then of Clytemnestra, and more distant events like the Trojan War. Then we pause his story, go to Odysseus, who leaves Calypso and then tells the Phaeacians what happened in a midst of bardic stories about a mythologized past. Then the stories of Odysseus and Telemachus align, as they, united physically and chronologically, purge the Ithacan household. Nolan likes converging narratives too. The different timescales of Inception's Endgame and the entirety of Dunkirk come to mind. But the play isn't terribly non-linear, and the flashbacks don't have much to do with any theme. Nolan likes ideas or themes that can pervade the story, like Tenet taking the Sator Square and using that, the idea of something that is the same forward and backward, to create a whole story enthralled by that concept. I do think the second half of the poem, the revenge saga on Ithaca, will feature far more prominently in the movie than the grand display of monsters. You don't cast Tom Holland as Telemachus and Robert Pattinson as Antinous without planning to use them to their fullest, and having the roles Eumaeus and Melantho known well in advance also hints at their more prominent roles. But again, I'm getting stuck on the idea of theme. I could see some sort of bringing Troy home with you idea, the war isn't over, but that alone doesn't feel like Nolan's style. The greatest potential I see for some mind-bending grand revelation would actually be, again, Athena. She and Odysseus bond over their uses of disguise and deception to outwit foes that should dramatically overpower them. A monumental Cyclops, Charybdis that's part monster, part force of nature, an army of Trojans or of suitors, the wrath of other gods. And as the disguised goddess navigates the world, there's often a question of who knows what. Does Telemachus recognize the disguised Athena? Does he recognize his own father? Does Odysseus recognize Athena? Can he trick her? Can she trick them? Who all can they deceive? Who else is trying to deceive them? Can you trust Circe? Can you trust Calypso? Can you trust Penelope? The musical extends this idea of a confused mind to the underworld, with lines like, "The underworld confuses the mind and nothing's what it seems." If I had to make a prediction, I'd say this is the element of the Odyssey that might most appeal to Nolan's interest and style, the idea that nothing is what it seems. Everyone you meet could be sincere or lying, a friend or a foe or a god or goddess in disguise, and the danger of guessing wrong could be deadly. I don't know how he'll adapt this idea into a story that so many people already know, but I'll be going into the film with the idea of deception in mind. Maybe there will be some grand revelation at the end, showing how much Athena was influencing behind the scenes, how many characters were actually her or being manipulated by her. A man and a goddess, two many-faced masters of deception, playing games of fate, defiance, and revenge. I'll be curious to see if Nolan's mind latched onto any of these ideas as he constructed his version of the Odyssey. But whatever he creates, his story will be added to the likes of Epic, as media reimagining this more than 2,000-year-old story. It's incredible to me that after so much time, we're still telling the same stories. In some ways, the past is a foreign world, but in other ways, nothing's changed. These modern retellings paradoxically help me feel more connected to the past. We still love listening to the same ideas. We still love to marvel. There's something intrinsically human to the idea of sitting down and letting your mind be swept away on an odyssey. It was true of Odysseus telling his tale to the Phaeacians, of the storytellers whose narratives Homer compiled in the oral tradition, and of the millennia of retellings and reimaginings conducted by storytellers and audiences alike since these ancient legends began.